Right. We are live, hypothetically. uh, Great. Okay, let's hope that everything is going according to plan. Fantastic. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from the creative Contessa. I am here in Daegu, South Korea still, although in 2 weeks, this time in 2 weeks, I will be in Thailand, actually. So welcome to Medieval Storytime, episode 30. I've got some interesting and very diverse readings for you today. But of course, as always, we're going to start with the traditional getting dressed ritual. I shall be dressing today in 15th century Florentine fashion in what I think has rapidly become everyone's favorite dress. The striped green gamora from my early days, my pre-Contessa days when I was just a noble lady without much of a title in a noble household. So this is a gamora. Good morning, Susan. Thank you. Good to see you again. This is a gamora, and it is cut in the Florentine fashion, although the stripes are very much Milanese and not Florentine at all, as far as I can tell. I have zero evidence of stripes in Florence in this era, unfortunately. But when I made this dress 25 years ago, I didn't know that. I thought that, at that time, I had the complete misconception that portraits I saw of ladies in Milan were adequate documentation for how ladies in Florence dressed. I now know that is entirely untrue because the way people dress in Florence is the way I ordered stuff. Oh, those are probably cabbages.
That would explain the weight.
Yeah. That the way people dressed in Milan in the 1480s is not the way people dressed in Florence in the 1480s at all. And this difference, this regional variation, was absolutely acknowledged at the time consciously, because in expense accounts and inventories from this era, the clerks will actually note down if a garment is of foreign origin. And remember, according to Florentines, Naples was foreign, Milan was foreign, Venice was foreign, Pisa was foreign, Lucca was foreign. So, Lorenzo de' Medici's accounts talk about garments of a variety of origins, including French, by the way. So the idea that there were very specific local styles in the second half of the 15th century is 100% true. It's documentable. People absolutely acknowledged the regional variations in fashions, but by the same token, they also wore fashions from other regions. So Lorenzo de' Medici and his mother Clarice and his mother Lucrezia and his wife Clarice, they all had garments that had several garments that were foreign in origin relative to Florence. But I find it crazy that there wouldn't have been stripes, as it would have been easily woven. It's not there. It's not that there weren't stripes, it's that it wasn't a fashion in Florence. It was a fashion that is demonstrable and worn in Milan. It's just not, you can't document it to Florence whatsoever. I found zero evidence of striped gamore or striped cotte in 1470s through 1490s Florence. Not visual, not documentary, not archaeological. So it's not a question that, often with fashion, it's not a question of whether someone could have done something. It's just that they didn't want to, for whatever reason. It just wasn't the fashion. It's like people could have made dresses that only came down to their mid-thighs. Although there are more practical reasons to not make dresses that only come down to your mid-thighs in the 15th century. But yeah, it just wasn't done. Milan, you start to see striped dresses in about 1490. And there's actually some theory, I have a theory that the reason you see striped dresses in Milan is because Beatrice d'Este becomes the Duchess of Milan, and she brings with her Neapolitan fashions, which are actually Spanish fashions. So yeah, that's what we have going on. So no, this style of gown, this cut of this dress with stripes, probably never happened, unfortunately. Yeah, it is what it is. I prefer to go where the evidence takes me rather than try to prove a negative or do something that I can't document. That's just me. I don't, by the way, you all do you. If you want to make a striped 1480 style Florentine Gamora, great. That's fantastic. I just like to be honest that I can't document it. Yeah, that's what it comes down to. We both have very similar hair. Rachel, yours might be just a wee bit longer than mine, though. Yeah, my hair is also crimpy at the moment because it was in braids all night, so it looks a little bit shorter than it actually is. Yeah, it definitely looks a little shorter than it actually is right at the moment. So I'm just lacing up my Gamora. This is spiral lacing, for those who are wondering. So this is spiral lacing, and actually you'll notice we have started making these twisted shapes, which you see there's one portrait in which this appears from about 1490, and it is attributed to Ghirlandaio. It's in the style of, they're not really certain who painted it, but it probably wasn't actually Ghirlandaio. And if you look at the top of her Gamora, you can see that her lace has this kind of end on it. So yeah, we've actually started making those and putting them on to the laces for my Italian gowns because it's documentable to Italy. I've never seen this kind of cute little twisted shape on outside of Florence, but it is very much in this portrait, and it's really easy to make. And I'm actually thinking of starting to make them and make the laces like this and sell them. I'm not certain if people would want to pay for the amount of time it takes to do a finger loop braid. The shape itself is super easy. It takes almost no time at all to make. It takes like maybe 5 minutes front to back to finish it and twist it and finish it. The lace itself takes about a half an hour because it's actually the setup that takes the most time, a lot of the time on making 15th century laces. That takes about 5 minutes depending on what you have available. Okay, so let's just go ahead and adjust my sleeves. Now remember that if I were to be leaving my abode, I, as a lady, capital L, patrician, aristocrat, whatever, would absolutely have to put another layer over top of this. I am, however, for the nonce, inviting you into my private quarters for story time. Therefore, I shall not be putting on one of the overlayers. The overlayers could include a garment called a giornea, which some of you call the tabard dress, even though it was definitely never called that at all in the period, not in English, not in French, not in Italian. They were called giornee in Italian. It's open on the sides, front and back flat, basically. They usually have a train, right? Or a toppa. The toppe were they had a full skirt and they were closed in the front, open here, and they laced over top of, well, they could lace or not lace over top of the gamora or ricotta. There's a couple of other layers, though the toppe and the giornee are really the decorative ones. Other overlayers that would go on were more practical in nature, designed to add warmth to your ensemble, or just to obscure your body if you were trying to hide your figure because you were married. Okay, let me see. Are you wearing bling? I will be putting on some bling today. Today I'm going to be putting on Beatrice d'Este's jewel. But first we have to do my hair. So I'm just going to toss my hair in braids. My condottiero is somewhere else, and we're not actually set up yet at the moment back here for doing the full 15th century Florentine hairstyle with hair taping and fringe and everything. I'm actually still playing around with how to achieve the curled forelocks that are clearly displayed in most of the portraits. There's a couple of options using authentic medieval 15th century techniques. I mean, obviously I could just use a curling iron. I wouldn't do that to my hair, though. I don't want to use a curling iron on my hair because it's destructive to your hair to apply that kind of level of heat to it. It actually damages it. That's what that smell is. That is your hair burning. So I'd rather not do that. Alternatives from period that I can actually document seem to involve chemicals that make your hair curl a perm. Yes, you heard me right. in the 15th and 16th century, they were applying chemicals to the hair to make it curl. So yes, they had what we would call a perm now. And these chemicals are right toxic. They are caustic, they are toxic, I mean, modern perm chemicals are too. So I'm not judging in general. I'm just observing that anyone who has this bizarre fantasy about the all natural treatments that came in the pre-modern world. No, they just use different harmful chemicals to achieve a lot of their ends. We have harmful synthetic chemicals. They had harmful, more naturally occurring chemicals. So I'm definitely not going to apply any, I've looked at the concoctions, they're detailed recipes. There's a book from, oh, thank you, Jay. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, I know you all don't usually get to actually see my hair, right? You almost never get to see my hair. So there's this book from, and it's a little bit after this, 1560, a detailed book of beauty treatments for everything, for all of your body, for your skin, for your nails, for your hair, for how to make it curly, how to make it blonde, how to make it black, how to make it brown. The hair dyes are also really awful, by the way, when you look at what's in them. Again, not a judgment, an observation. Modern hair dyes are mostly just as awful as the medieval and Renaissance hair dye concoctions were. My point is that I am not interested in working with these chemicals, nor am I interested in applying them to my hair and having them against my skin, possibly absorbing into my bloodstream. So what that means is that I'm looking for alternative ways to achieve those beautiful curls that you see. I have experimented with rag curls, but I have no evidence of rag curls in this era. I have experimented with threaded curls, where I actually make the curls into ringlets and then use yarn to just hold them in place. That actually seems to do okay if my hair is wet the night before I do it and I let it dry overnight. Again, this is all conjectural because I have no evidence that that is in fact how they would have made these curls. I've seen in the 15th century, I can recall seeing one curling iron in a depiction. I think it was in a 15th century German source, actually. It doesn't look like our curling irons. It looks very different from our curling iron, but it was still recognizable as a curling iron. And looking at it in the picture, it would absolutely create the kind of waves and curls that you do see on the Florentine forelocks. Again, I'm trying to avoid burning my hair to make it curl. So yeah, still experimenting. And so I might have to end up settling on a technique that is conjecturally and plausibly 15th century based on availability of materials that they would have had, rather than actually applying an authentically 100% documentable version. Because again, toxic and damaging. Not my goal in living medieval or any living history activity. Okay, so I'm just covering my hair in a coif today. Some of you call this a Flemish coif, or a milkmaid coif, or a winged coif. Actually, in 15th century English, the word coif is almost never used for the coverings of women's hair. Kerchief or couvre-chef or coverchef or coverchief, there's at least 20 different spellings, is the word that seems to be used for any kind of white linen thing that you put on your hair in 15th century English. Coif, or as some of you prefer to say coif, even though in modern English we definitely, a lot of thousands and thousands of people are saying coif. The word coif seems to be limited to the cap, skull cap like thing that men put on their head, also especially in the context of arming garments. So yeah, for women, I know we all use the word coif, but in 15th century English, it seems that kerchief is the more authentic word, which is a little confusing because then in Italian, they actually do use the word in 15th century. They do use the cognate cuffia for a variety of headdresses like this, basically linen or silk headdresses like this that are somehow shaped and go on the head rather than just a general wrap, right? So yeah, false friends, as we linguists like to say, it's a false friend. Right, so I'm just mostly adjusted now. I've given my my sleeves the proper poof. And if I had a damsel here, I would actually have her tighten the lacing on these sleeves so that the poofs would actually stay poofed when I move. But this brings me to the topic of one of my recent videos where I seek to reassure you, my dear creators, my viewers, my audiences, my followers, members of my court. I seek to reassure you that your ensemble will almost never, ever, ever look exactly like the picture, because portraits and altar pieces, portraits that are contained in altar pieces, actual personal portraits, depictions of people from the Middle Ages of any kind have also been run through a filter. It's just that the artist is the filter. So the artist may or may not depict every single crease. They may or may not depict every single seam. And in Italy especially, there is a practice of portraits sort of softening the world, of making it more orderly, of making it more beautiful, of making it more delicate than it actually is, especially in the features, right? Especially in the facial features. So whenever you see a woman's portrait, man's portrait, any portrait from 15th century Florence, please remember that a filter has been applied. Their skin wasn't really that flawless, men or women. Their hair wasn't that perfect. It wasn't that perfectly kempt. Their clothing wasn't that perfectly smooth. Every poof was not that perfectly symmetrical. Don't try. You will make yourself crazy if you try. And what ends up happening is a lot of costumers, especially costumers who aren't looking at it from a historical perspective, they will then do modern cheats to try to make the poofs, for instance, look exactly right. Like they will install the poofs into the sleeve itself rather than the poof just being the poof of your camicia through the sleeve. Because then you can create perfect poofs, but that's not what they did. That isn't how they made their poofs. They had sleeves that were segmented like this, and they just poofed the linen through it, right? So, yeah, and we know this because we have accounts that talk about the materials that have been purchased for making a set of garments. And for instance, white linen is not one of the materials that is included in making the sleeves of a lady's garment. So, yeah. Anyway, let me see. Okay. Let me see. They use some sort of plants for brushing teeth. I can't remember the name of one is popular. Yeah, so the brushing teeth, right? So brushing teeth was generally, they generally used an abrasive to do that. So it was usually ground up chalk was a common one. They would also use a stick where the end of the stick had been splintered. Soft splintered, a small stick, and this, if you actually splinter the end of the stick and you sort of work it, it will actually sort of broom out into a bunch of relatively soft little ends, and then you can use that to scrub your teeth as well. So they would there's actually an account I read of polishing your teeth until they shine brightly. And of course, some people say, well, the chalk was really, really fine, so it should have been okay. It shouldn't have brushed their enamel away. But we know from examining teeth from medieval skeletons that apparently this technique of brushing your teeth using an abrasive like chalk was in fact bad for your enamel, because there's a lot of abrasive enamel removal that we can see on these teeth. So yeah, your teeth would be clean, but they would also be more subject. So your breath would be fine. Your teeth would be clean, but they would also be subject to, more cavities, because the enamel is what protects you against cavities. So yeah, medieval people absolutely brushed their teeth, but not like we do, and not in the same way. They also used sugar sometimes to brush their teeth. Sugar was an extreme, maybe not obviously. Up until the 15th century, sugar was an extreme luxury item and was used in very small quantities. For major sweetenings, honey was usually the sweetener of choice, like if you needed a lot of sweet, which they didn't do either a lot, because honey was also a sort of luxury good. You couldn't just produce large amounts of it and have it available all the time the way we do now. But sugar was used in small quantities. So using sugar to brush your teeth would have absolutely been a luxury approach to tooth care, which is yet another way in which often the aristocrats and the well-heeled merchants were actually doing things to their body that were much less salubrious to the point of destructive than the members of society who were on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. Irony of ironies, right? Did they wash Jose Figueroa? Did they wash salt in a cloth bag? Could you rephrase that question? I'm not quite picking up what I'm putting down. Let me see. Okay, so I'm sorry, I missed a question. Never seen an Amish on live stream, no disrespect. No, I'm not Amish, so no disrespect. How can we tell this is not an Amish ensemble? I'm about to make it super not Amish. How can we tell this is not an Amish ensemble? The neckline, see what multiple things. Massively low neckline, not Amish. Amish, I grew up in Amish country. I'm not Amish, and I'm not dressed like Amish either. Amish, the whole point of Amish attire is modesty. So Amish men and women wear garments that come up to their neck like this, right here. Right, that's step one. Step two, this is a fancy dress. This is a very fancy dress. It's bright, it's colorful, it's got stripes, it's got tons of fabric. It's showing all of this massive amounts of white, snowy, expensive fabric through my sleeves. Not Amish, not modest. This 15th century kerchief, this is just how all women in Northern Europe especially, this was the casual, at home hair covering for the upper aristocratic women, at the lower levels of society, the working classes and farmers, i.e. peasants. This was something they would wear while they were doing their work, right? So not Amish, medieval European. And if you ever seen an actual Amish, the kind of kerchief that they wear, it's a much smaller, much more fitted cap, not sort of, luxurious like this one is. Yeah, no disrespect, Poppy. Oh, there we go. Okay, goodbye. Saga, welcome. Okay. Oh, goodness. Oh, no. Shoot, and now I can't get rid of that comment. I hate technology so much. Okay, let me see if I can get the chats back. Nope. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so I've lost the ability to look at the comments, and I've lost the ability to do anything to the comments. Ryan, are you there? Okay, the comments just came back. Great. I need you to get rid of that comment. It's now pinned, unfortunately, and I can't actually access it. Okay, well, I see comments again, but I can't scroll back. Okay, so let me see. I grew up using baking soda to brush. After a while, parents bought Colgate powder. Then they moved to Crest paste. Years later, I met a woman who brushed her teeth with Ajax scouring powder. Oh my God. Well, that's unfortunate. That is really unfortunate. Wow. Yeah, don't use abrasives to scrub your teeth, please. Jesus.
Did you already delete it?
I blocked it, but it's showing on the, you might have to go into restream because it's showing on the screen.
You can't.
No, it's gone. I can't. It won't let me scroll back.
You can't. It's gone.
Open up restream. Oh, shoot. Okay, everyone. Well, maybe I can show a better comment. Yeah. Okay, there we go. I figured it out. Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah. I got it. Okay. Yay. I managed the technology. Okay. So everyone, I have put on a little bit of bling. This is a replica of a jewel owned by Beatrice d'Este. She was a member of the House of Este, and she was basically a Spanish princess because she was actually from Naples. She She was of the Aragonese family, royal family is what I meant, not from Naples. She was of the Aragonese royal family. So this gem is actually one that is depicted on her. She's wearing it in a fillet in her hair, actually, in a portrait from around 1490. And this is made by Armor and Casting. So you can buy wonderful little replicas like this from their amazing shop. Yeah. So just a little bit of sort of semi-modest bling, because obviously jewels like this are not, if this were real jewels, they're not, they're glass. If these were real gems, then this would be a very expensive item, but it's not overstated like some of the Burgundian style collars of state are from this era. And sad little travel story, by the way, travel tip for those of you who travel to medieval living history events and you have to fly. There are thieves who inspect your bags. I know this because I've had things stolen from my bags during inspections when they inspect them behind the scenes. And unfortunately, people look at these replica items and assume that they're real gold and they're real jewels. So I have actually lost some of my replica Armor and Castings 15th century pendants like this. They were called nautches in 15th century English. I've lost them because they were stolen, because some reprobate miscreant villain assumed that they were real gold and real gems and took them thinking they could fence them and get a lot of money. I'm confident that they were really angry when they went to fence them and were told that it's not real gold and they're not real gems. And so probably my beautiful pieces that were stolen were just thrown away. I'm assuming they were just thrown away. So yeah, really frustrating. Did women wear a hennin outdoors all the time, or did they also show their hairstyles? Or was that frowned upon? So if you're talking, okay, remember everyone, when we're talking about medieval Europe, when we're talking about medieval Renaissance Europe, every region, that's 1,000 years of history. So that doesn't cover the whole, the things change. Practices change, fashions change, what's in style changes. The so-called hennin, which was actually called a turret in 15th century English, hennin was never used, is not a term from the Middle Ages. It's a invented term by the Victorians. The pointy conical hat that is being discussed here was in fashion from the 1450s to the 1450s to the 1480s-ish. In France and Flanders and the Low Countries, was now the Netherlands, and also in certain forms in England and Scotland as well, and in Ireland, in fact. And this item was, yes, it covered the hair more or less entirely. So no, in that time, in those places, for the most part, women didn't do hairstyles like coiffeurs. They didn't show their hair. You might see a little bit of like here in the front like this, and maybe some little wispies like this you might see. But no, they kept their hair covered. They either in beautiful headdresses or under a kerchief in the northern parts of Europe. In Germany in the 15th century and about the same time, they'll actually do braids that you can see coming forward from the headdress, but the rest of their hair will be more or less covered. Or they're wearing a big ornate wig of braids that has some kind of wonderful headdress on top of it. That's in what is now Germany in the 15th century. Italy is really where you first start seeing what we would call a hairstyle that is exposed. That trend, that idea of doing a hairstyle with your hair, doing some kind of braid or hair taping, doing something to your fringe, that really seems to start in the Italies, because Italy's not unified until the 19th century, actually. That starts in the Italies. And then as the decades wear on, as the centuries wear on, that idea of having a hairstyle spreads beyond Italy. I expect possibly through the marriages of, say, people like the Medici, the daughters of the Medici who marry into the French royal court, for instance, might be part of the spreading of that idea that you can, in fact, basically have a hairstyle, a nice, neat, well done hairstyle, and you don't have to cover your hair in any kind of real way. But that idea starts in the Italies and then spreads out from there. But even still, even in the Italies, depending on which part of the Italies, there's still like accessories that would go on. You'd wear like a nice fillet with gems on it, or maybe a nice hairnet, or something to bring out your hair. The idea of just having just your hair bare and styled with nothing, that's not done in the Middle Ages or Renaissance. Even in the end, towards the 16th century, end of the second half of the 16th century, when Italian women really start doing hairstyles. Even then, they've got, you know, these accessories that they put in them to really make them look particularly fabulous. Yeah, medieval Italy is the medieval OG of the style icons. Yeah, it does kind of all start in Italy. You know, everyone thinks about the Renaissance spreading out from Italy, and they talk about the art, they talk about humanism. No one ever bothers to talk about Italy's impact on fashions and hairstyles. It's kind of, yeah. I adore this channel. I just came upon the channel obsessed with Elizabeth I, Henry VIII, etc. Any medieval Europe, especially the way they lived their lives. Jessica, welcome. Thank you. Welcome to my community. Wasn't Beatrice d'Este from Ferrara and the daughter of Duke Ercole? Yes, she was, but her mother was from Naples and was of the Aragonese royal family. Yes. So so Beatrice d'Este, she is from Ferrara. She's an Este, right? But it's her mother who's Aragonese. Because the Aragonese royal family rules Naples in the 15th century for most of it. And so, yeah, she brings those Spanish fashions with her, and you can definitely see that influence in her daughters as well. And it influences the court in Ferrara, and then it influences Milan as the daughters basically spread out through Italy and start taking their Spanish fashions with them. And even in the era, the Italians would refer to them as Spanish fashions. Various across Italy, they recognize that these things that these Este girls are wearing, these Este women are wearing, are Spanish. Right. Let me see. Question. You look beautiful. I love everything about your outfit. What era is it from and the fabric? Cotton or linen? This is from 1480s Florence, basically. This should technically be silk. This should be a silk brocade or a silk damask. It's not though. This is synthetic, but it should be silk. This is my first ever dress in this style from 25 years ago when I couldn't afford silks of this kind. So it's a synthetic, but it is supposed to replicate silk, and it's pretty heavy. This is linen, and it's lined in linen, and this is linen as well. So linen and silk basically. And the lace is silk. So the lace I made, you know, I do finger loop braiding. If you want to learn to make this style of lace, right, I have a tutorial on my YouTube channel. I have one tutorial that's available for everyone. And if you're a member or a patron on Patreon, then you have access to multiple workshops on finger loop braiding, including advanced finger loop braiding workshops. So you can learn how to do the more advanced, fancier stuff as well. But if you want to learn to make a pretty lace like this, that can also be used as trim around your collar or cuffs or whatever, then I have a tutorial on my YouTube channel, Braiding Beautifully, I think it's called. And it's step-by-step, 21 minutes long, teaches you everything you need to know from beginning to end, and you'll walk away with maybe some blisters on your fingers if you're using silk thread, but you'll walk away with a really pretty piece at the end. Let me see. El Courier. Gracias. Thank you so much. Yeah, so if you check out if you're new to my channel, welcome. First off, welcome to my community. If you're new, thank you so much for that generous donation. I appreciate everyone's super chats today. If you check out my channel, I have hundreds and I've got thousands of hours of quality medieval living history content at this point, no doubt. I've got full tutorials. I've got recordings of all my live streams, living history, live streams from medieval living history events, interviews with medieval craftsmen, people replicating originals from the Middle Ages. I've got dance tutorials, I've got sewing tutorials, I've got cooking tutorials. So check it out, but later on. Okay, so I'm going to let you all have one last chance at questions about my ensemble, but today is medieval story time. So I've got some readings selected for us today. So we'll be discussing, I'll do a reading, like in my proper narrator voice, and then we will discuss each passage bit by bit. I'll explain the historical context. We'll talk about symbolism and meaning. And I have 4 very different readings selected today. So today's fiction, today's pure fiction, is another of the Lay of Marie de France. And this is the tale of the 2 lovers, right? Marie de France is this amazing 12th century authoress from the court of Henry II. She is French and she's writing in French. The court of Henry II of England was a French-speaking court, a Norman French-speaking court for certain. And so we are going to hear the tale of the two lovers. 2025, Heath, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Then we have, well, a reading from Honor of Vengeance and Social Trouble. We're going to be reading one of the pardons issued by Duke Charles the Good, the glorious and puissant Duke of Burgundy in 1464, I think it was, 1463 or 64, to a man who had been convicted of murder and to his servants. And so we'll be reading this pardon letter. And the exciting thing about these pardon letters is that they are a detailed account of the events surrounding and leading up to and the crime itself. So we actually get an idea of daily life in Burgundy in the Middle Ages, in the 15th century, including where people stayed, what sorts of things they carried on their person, the activities, how they interacted with each other, right? So we'll be doing a reading from that. It'll be it's a pardon letter, so caution, it is a little violent. I will also be taking us to some of you have been asking about what life was like for peasants in the Middle Ages. And even though in certain circles, certain historians are trying to move away from the word history because not history, gosh darn it, peasant, from the word peasant, because the word peasant has a lot of baggage with it. It does a lot of the thinking for itself, for us, as a historian recently said very cleverly. This is a man who was a peasant in Tuscany, in basically the greater sphere of influence of Florence, and he kept memoirs. He kept a memoir of daily transactions from his life, of happenings that he thought was important to note down, and this has survived. So we're going to read through some of his memoir. Now, this memoir is not like you would understand it. It's not like, today this thing happened and I feel sad. It's much more transactional than that. It's more like, today, I paid the carter 10 florins for transporting my goods. So it's a different way to get an eye picture of daily life from a very objective perspective of a man who was a peasant. He was a farmer. He lived and worked in the fields. But this counters the narrative of the poor, starving peasant that I absolutely resent, because that's just not what peasant life was like in the Middle Ages. Most peasants didn't starve. Most peasants weren't poor. And this provides the evidence of that, right? So we'll be reading that. And then we have, this one is more of a memoir in the way that we understand memoir. This is a memoir from a man named Boccaccio. He's a merchant. He's an Italian merchant. He's a merchant from Florence, and he actually wrote down his adventures. So this is an exciting, basically, travel adventure from the 15th century, the late 14th, early 15th century. And so I'm going to read to you a very funny episode in which he ends up staying in Budapest now was Buda and Pest was two separate cities in this era. So he was staying at a home in Buda, and this party happens and he's sick. And so this really funny series of events happens while he's there. And this is told through his own voice. This is his own accounting of this story, or recounting of this story. So we're going to be reading from that as well. So I've got 4 very interesting readings prepared for us today. So let's go ahead and get into it. There was a good question, though. How did you fit your bodice of the kirtle? Is it historical? How did I fit? Yes. So how did I fit? Yeah, the pattern, I made the pattern for this all myself. It is historical, and yet it's not. So this is one of my earliest, this is the first gown I made in this style. And so this is 25 years ago. I was still a baby interpreter of historical art. And I actually cover the topic of this. I have a video called My Medieval Sewing Mistakes. If you want to check it out later, I talk about this. So I misinterpreted a line that I saw on a portrait from about 1506. I interpreted it as being a seam here in Italy. And it wasn't, and it was not, there wasn't an actual seam. It's actually just decoration. And I also decided that because it gave me the shape I wanted, that I would just extrapolate that back to 1480 and that would be fine. So there is actually a seam here. You can see it where the pattern comes together. That is not appropriate for 15th century Italy. I have not seen any evidence of that. We have an extant Gomorrah from the 1460s. It doesn't have a seam there. None of the portraits from the 15th century show a seam there. None of them even show the kind of shaping that could be created by a seam there. So it is and it isn't. It's based on historical, but it's a misinterpretation. So I no longer make my Gomorrah this way. I now make my Gomorrah as 4 pieces, which is 100% documentable to this era instead of 6 pieces. So yeah, good question, Haas. Nice. In movies, let me see. In movies, when the higher ups called people peasants in a demeaning way, I always thought it meant a poor person until I went to English class when I figured out it means farmers, right? Yes. So yeah, peasant is not the equivalent of poor person. It is not. Peasants were just farmers. 80% of Europeans, even as of the 15th century, were peasants, were farmers. It did not denote a poor person. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have that misconception that peasant is a synonym for poor person. It is not. Couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, many peasants were very wealthy. So yeah. Okay. Well, everyone, we're going to go ahead and move in for story time. Just bring everything closer. Get myself settled down here. Okay. So the format for medieval story time is as follows. I will first do a clean reading of the text. So I'll just read it straight through with minor comments along the way. And then we will go through it bit by bit together. And I will take your questions and we will explore the meaning and I'll provide context, et cetera, et cetera. So as we go along. So that means please save your questions until we get to question time. I can sometimes scroll back through the chat, but sometimes the chat moves so quickly that things get lost. So just keep that in mind. Comment is, I'd hope princess seams were historical. Fitting a kirtle when you're part of the small boob community is hard. Okay, so I'm going to, I know you hope princess seams are. So here's the thing about princess seams. Depending on where you are, they are documentable, just not to the Italies. So in the 15th century, we have a couple of examples of kirtles, specifically kirtles, that have what we might call a princess seam, except it goes all the way down. It doesn't just end here at the waist. The princess seam it becomes a 6-panel dress all the way from the top all the way down. There's a picture, a portrait, kind of a portrait, but not really, of Agnès Sorel, the mistress of Charles VI or 7th. French king, the mistress of the French king. She dies in the middle of the 15th century, and there's a depiction of her that is posthumous, unfortunately, but it depicts her in a kirtle. It's a very famous one, by the way, especially for French medieval art, because it shows her with her kirtle unlaced, and she has a very perky apple-shaped breast poking out, and the baby Jesus in her hand. So she's supposed to be the Virgin Mary, the Virgin crowned, right? And you can actually see on her blue kirtle very clearly that it's got a seam that runs all the way down through her skirts. So it's not so much a princess seam as it is a separate panel of fabric. So that is on the 15th century Franco-Flemish style kirtle, where you do see a princess seam. And I do want to play around with that on my next kirtle, in fact, because it's very interesting. Yeah. How does it count? Let me see. How does it count in Ireland and England? I have no evidence of the princess seam in either Ireland or England. There is one dress that has survived possibly from the 14th, 15th century in Ireland, the Moy gown. It does not have princess seams. It's got 4 panels. So yeah, so I don't have evidence for it in Ireland. That being said, the evidence for clothing in Ireland is relatively sparse compared to other parts of Europe. England is the same deal. I don't have evidence of it in England. Again, evidence 15th century, the War of the Roses and the God knows the various religious movements that purposefully destroyed art, any art that was identified as Catholic. God damn you, Puritans. There's not as much visual evidence of 15th century clothing in England as we might like. So I can just say I haven't seen evidence for it in England or Ireland. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna stick with. Okay, everyone. Okay, moving on to our stories. We're going to start with the fantasy story, the medieval fantasy story / folktale. So again, this is a lay, which is supposedly like a Breton story, basically historical traditional Breton story, a story from Brittany, and this was compiled in the 12th century. So Marie de France is like a host of authors before and after her who are working with source material that is more probably oral in nature, that is some kind of folk story tradition. But what she adds to the story when she writes it in her voice, in her version, is she adds her own characterization, she adds her own details, she adds her own psychology, she adds her own symbolism. You know, Boccaccio and Chaucer, the same way, they were just basically documenting folk stories from this era. Shakespeare was taking folk stories and legends and history and adding his own depth of, you know, psychological depth, symbolic depth, etc. So, you know, none of those stories are really necessarily original, the story itself. It's how they're written that is specific to our author. So Marie de France was not just jotting down stories as other people told them. She knew the story and then she wrote it as an author would by adding her own depth to it. Yeah. I came in on the damn you Puritans. Yeah, Shuriken, welcome to my court. There are two groups of people that I regularly at whom I regularly cast aspersions and whom I regularly curse. One are Reformationists who participated in iconoclasm. Two are French revolutionaries, because both have been massively destructive to our understanding of medieval material culture. Yeah. Matt Torrance, someone from the 15th century time traveled forward. You are correct. Yeah, I definitely don't need to brush up my Shakespeare. I have studied Shakespeare in depth. It was part of my undergraduate work. Yeah. Okay. So, The Two Lovers by Marie de France, right? Les deux amants. There happened once in Normandy a famous adventure of two young people who loved each other. Both died because of love. The Bretons composed a lay about it, and they gave it the title Les deux amants, the two lovers. The truth is that in Neustria, which we now call Normandy, there's a wondrously great and high mountain. The two youngsters lie buried up there. Near one side of that mountain, with much deliberation and judgment, a king who was lord of the Pistrians had a wall built. He named the city after the Pistrians. He called it Pistre. The name has lasted ever since. The town and its dwellings still remain. We know the region well. It's called the Valley of Pistre. The king had a beautiful daughter, an extremely gracious girl. He found consolation in the maiden after he had lost his queen. Many reproached him for this. Even his own household blamed him. When he heard that people were talking about his conduct, he was saddened and troubled. He began to consider how he could avoid anyone seeking to marry his daughter. So he sent word far and near to this effect. Whoever wanted to win his daughter should know one thing for certain. It was decreed and destined that he would have to carry her in his arms to the summit of the mountain outside the city without stopping to rest. When the news was known and spread throughout the region, many attempted the feat but couldn't succeed. There were some who pushed themselves so hard that they carried her halfway up the mountain. Yet they couldn't get any farther. They gave up there. So For a long time, he put off giving her away because no one wanted to ask for her hand. There was a young man in that country, the son of a count, refined and handsome. He undertook great deeds to win renown beyond all other men. He frequented the court of the king. He stayed there quite often, and he came to love the king's daughter. And many times he pleaded with her to grant him her love and become his mistress. Because he was brave and refined, and because the king thought highly of him, she granted him her love, and he humbly thanked her for it. They often conversed together, and they loved each other truly, and as much as they could, they hid their love so that no one would discover it. This restraint disturbed them greatly, but the young man made up his mind that he would rather suffer such hardships than be too hasty in his love and lose everything. He was so hard-pressed by love for her. So it chanced one day that the young man, who was so wise, so brave, and so handsome, came to his beloved and made his complaint to her. He earnestly begged her to run away with him. He couldn't stand the pain any longer. If he asked her father for her, he knew that the king loved her so much that he'd refuse to give her up unless the suitor could carry her up his arms to the summit of the mountain. The maiden answered him. "Dearest," she said, "I know very well that you couldn't carry me up there for anything. You aren't strong enough. If I ran away with you, my father would be grief-stricken and angry. He would suffer for the rest of his life. Certainly, I love and cherish him enough that I would never want to upset him. You'll have to think of another scheme because I don't want to hear any more of this one. I have a relative in Salerno, a rich woman with lots of property. She's lived there more than 30 years. She's practiced the medical arts for so long that she's an expert in medicines. She knows herbs and roots so well that if you want to go to her, bringing a letter from me with you, and tell her your problem, she'll take an interest in it. That she'll make up such prescriptions and give you such potions that they'll fortify you and give you lots of strength. When you return to this region, you'll ask my father for me. He'll think you're just a child, and he'll tell you the agreement that he won't give me away to any man, whatever pains he may take, unless he can carry me up the mountain." The youth listened to the idea and the advice of the maiden. It delighted him, and he thanked her. He took leave of his mistress and went off to his own country. Quickly, he supplied himself with rich clothes, money, palfreys, and pack mules. Only the most trustworthy of his men did the youth take with him. He went to stay in Salerno to consult his beloved's aunt. On her behalf, he gave her a letter. When she had read it from one end to the other, she kept him with her until she knew all about his situation. She strengthened him with medicines and gave him such a potion that, no matter how fatigued he might be, no matter how constrained, no matter how burdened, the potion would still revive his entire body, even the veins and the bones, so that he would have all the strength he needed the moment he drank it. The young man took the potion and returned to his own land. He was so joyful, so happy, he wasted no time at home on his return. He went to the king to ask for the king's daughter. If the king would give her to him, he would take her and carry her to the summit of the mountain. The king made no attempt to refuse him, though he took him for a great fool, because the lover was so young. Many great men, hardy and wise, had undertaken this task, and none could accomplish it at all. The king named and set a date. Then he sent for his vassals, his friends, everybody he could summon. He wouldn't let anyone stay behind. Because of his daughter and the young man who is taking the chance of carrying her to the mountaintop, they came from everywhere. The damsel prepared herself. She fasted and dieted, cut down on her eating because she desired to help her lover. On the day when everyone arrived, the youth was there first. Sorry, I'm distracted by someone's bringing me tea.
I'm very distracting.
On the day when everyone arrived, the youth was there first. He didn't forget to bring his potion. Toward the Seine, out in the meadow, and into the great crowd assembled there, the king led his daughter. She wore nothing except her chemise. Her suitor lifted her into his arms. The small phial containing his potion he gave her to carry in her hand. He knew well she'd no desire to cheat him. But I'm afraid the potion did him little good, because he was entirely lacking in control. Off he went with her at top speed, and he climbed until he was halfway up the mountain. In his joy for his beloved, he forgot his potion. She noticed he was growing weak. "Love," she said, "drink. I can tell you're getting tired. Now's the time to regain your strength." The youth answered, "Sweetheart, my heart is very strong. I wouldn't stop for any price, not even long enough to take a drink, so long as I can still move an inch." The crowd below would raise a racket, deafen with their noise. Soon they'd have me all confused. I don't want to stop here. When they had gone 2/3 of the way up, he was on the verge of collapsing. Again and again, the maiden begged, "Dearest, take your medicine." But he wouldn't listen or take her advice. In great anguish, he staggered on. He reached the top of the mountain in such pain that he fell there and didn't rise again. The life went out of his body. The maiden looked down at her lover. She thought he had fainted. She knelt beside him, attempting to give him his potion, but there was no response. That is how he died, as I've told you. She grieved for him with loud woes and cries. She emptied and threw away the bottle that contained the potion. The mountain was well doused with it. The entire region and countryside were much improved thereby. Many a fine herb now found there owes its start to this potion. Now, I'll tell you about the damsel. When she knew she had lost her lover, you never saw anyone so grief-stricken. She lay down and stretched out beside him, took him in her arms, pressed him to her, kissed his eyes and lips again and again. Sorrow for him struck deep in her heart. She died there too, the maid who was so brave, so wise, so beautiful. The king and the others who were waiting for them, when they saw that they weren't returning, went after them and found them. The king fell down in a faint. When he could speak again, he grieved greatly. So did all of the companions present. They stayed there mourning for 3 days. Then they ordered a marble tomb and placed the 2 young people inside it. On the advice of everyone present, they buried them on the mountain's summit, and at last they went away. Because of the sad adventure of these young people, the place is now called the Mount of the 2 Lovers, and it happened just the way I've told you. The Bretons made a lay about it. Dorian Tranier, bienvenue, welcome. Okay, so it's a shorter of Marie de France's lay. So I picked it for that reason, because we have 4 readings and I didn't want to spend all my time on this one reading. There are, however, so many interesting details in this story. Okay, first, any initial questions? Any initial questions? Natalie says, your outfit is so pretty. Thank you so much. Or Natalia, grazie. Thank you so much. Love the compliment. Yeah, don't eat too much or else he won't get you up the mountain. Yeah. The little strategies are very interesting, right? The story has a very fascinating combination of pathos and humor that might seem at first at odds with itself, but honestly, medieval life was a combination of humor and pathos, of humor and horror, of rejoicing and sadness. So yeah, it is a bit sad, but you know, did you pick up that this is an teleological story, right? This is an origin story. So it is a story that very clearly, I would say, it has very old roots. So this was Marie de France is writing in the 12th century. That's when she composes this story based on something that I think might date back to, you know, to the first millennium, to the early parts of the first millennium. Are you departing?
I'm departing.
Okay.
Love you.
Enjoy your game. Oh, you need to bring me a teapot and drain that for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So this actually, because there's an origin story contained in here, Did you pick that up? There's an origin story of why there are all these herbs on the mountain. It has very classical vibes. Like, it really has very classical vibes. There's so many Roman and Greek, so many, Hellenistic myths that have this trope in them, that have this root contained within them, right? But there's also a lot of details about the realities of 12th century Europe, because there's mentions of places that are very far away from Pistre, right? So let's start at the beginning. So we have the mention of Neustria, and that's very interesting because Neustria is by the 12th century is the old term for a part of what was the Carolingian Empire, right? That is now Normandy. So that it's very interesting that still in the 12th century, the memory of that place name still exists, right? It's been centuries since Charlemagne reigned over the Frankish Empire. And yet the memory of Neustria as a place name survives at least into the 12th century. So I find that very interesting from a historiographical perspective, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's like, and so Hoscreate says, yes, you're right. It's like, I forgot to, by the way, could you please set it to subscribers only? I forgot to do that.
Yes, I can do that.
Yes, please.
Before I leave.
Yes.
Just because people are being
just because we have a few little boys who still live in their mother's basements, apparently. Oh, Hoscreate says it's like a pre-Romeo and Juliet, very much, especially the part about the tomb and people mourning, like everyone mourning for the death of these two young lovers. Yeah. So again, Shakespeare didn't really invent that many stories. He took stories that were extant and added his own depth to them, right? So so we start off in the city of Pistre, right, which is somewhere in Normandy. So Normandy is northern France, or central northern France, for those who don't know, who aren't familiar with geography. And we have this king, right? The king had a beautiful daughter, an extremely gracious girl. And I would like to clarify something here. Some of you may have misinterpreted what is meant here by consolation, right? So the king had a beautiful daughter, an extremely gracious girl. He found consolation in the maiden after he had lost his queen. I've heard some people say some very salacious things about this part of the story. It's not a physical consolation. The father is grieving for the loss, the king is grieving for the loss of his beloved wife. And so he's consoled by having the daughter still in his life. There is nothing untoward meant here in this telling of the story. The part that makes everyone so upset, many reproached him for this, even his own household blamed him. It's that he's keeping his daughter from marrying, right? They understand that as a princess of royal blood, she should marry. She should start a family of her own. She should be a queen in her own lands, basically, right? She needs to be allowed to fulfill her role and destiny as a young lady. He shouldn't keep her to himself and prevent her from moving on with the next stage of her life, right? That's why people are reproaching him. It's not that something untoward is happening between the father and the daughter. That's not it at all. That would be a very modern misinterpretation of this story, right? This is, yes, this is a Breton lay. That is correct. It is a Breton lay. And lay, L-A-I, this is basically it is a story that is typically Breton. So hypothetically, all of these stories are folk tales from 12th century, at least from 12th century, possibly earlier Britannia. Even though this one takes place in Normandy, this is a tale that was technically, according to Marie, composed by the Bretons, by the Britons. The Britons of Brittany, not the Britons of England. As 2025, he says, it is upsetting for her. I understand that. Yep, it's upsetting for the daughter that she is just basically kept as a doll, basically. She's kept as a doll for her father, a comfort, something, a talisman of comfort for her father, and not allowed to continue with the next stage of her life. Whether the next stage of her life is marrying a prince or joining a convent, right? Either way, she would then have independence of her own household, or, operating herself. Yeah. His consolation is the princess is what's left of his wife. Exactly. Haas creates, like, probably she looks like his wife, right? So he can look at her and be pleasantly reminded of the happy times. I think the other thing that is very beautiful about the beginning of this story, there's this misconception that medieval people, husbands and wives, didn't love each other, that there was none of that romantic love, like we understand romantic love, of that deep and abiding love that is passionate and romantic in nature. But this story, this story turns entirely on the idea of romantic love between a man and a woman, right? The king and the queen, clearly the king loved his queen so deeply that he was massively heartbroken by her loss. And so much so that he is willing to basically make his daughter suffer by keeping her with him, so that at least he'll always have that part of his beloved with him. Yeah. Story sounds familiar, but have read lots of Welsh stories. Yes, Oz 25, absolutely. I'm not saying this is an original story. What is original is the way that Marie tells it. The tale itself is no doubt a folk tale that was floating around probably many parts of Europe, and Wales, Wales and Britannia and Ireland, Scotland, England, right? They're all connected culturally by Celtic traditions. And by Celtic, I mean the Celts, the ancient Celts, the migratory people who swept from the steppes across Europe, leaving bits and bobs of their culture as they went along. So, there's definitely a common Celtic folk tradition that is still very much alive in the 12th century, in England, in Scotland, in Wales, in Ireland, in northern France, right? So yeah, 100%, no doubt that I wouldn't surprise me if there's a medieval Welsh story that is very similar to this one. So when he heard that people were talking about his conduct, the king, he was saddened and troubled, right? So he was upset that people would think ill of him. And that is interesting as well, because modern people tend to view medieval rulers as being absolute rulers, as being absolute monarchs, when in fact the idea of an absolute monarch is a modern one, right? It's basically kind of starts really coalescing in the 16th century, and then in the 17th century, Louis XIV makes sure that everyone understands what an absolute ruler is, what an absolute monarch is. So in the medieval period, especially in the 12th century, rulers had to care about what people thought about them, because if people started to think too ill of them, barons might get bad ideas about overthrowing them and taking the throne for themselves. So it's not, he might be a people pleaser and he might just want people to like him, but there's a practical component to pleasing your subjects in the 12th century. Especially the subjects who have power. I don't mean that he cared what his peasants thought of him. He didn't. I don't mean that. I'm talking about his barons. Yeah. Love the shout out to Salerno as well. Yes, I'm getting to Salerno. Shh, don't rush me, Leia. I'm getting there. I love the shout out to Salerno as well. Shh, we're getting there. Goodness gracious, spoiler alert. I'm teasing, Leia. I'm teasing. Yes, but I love the shout out to Salerno. So we're getting there. So, the idea that a king has to do things that are socially acceptable, that he can't violate the social norms, that's presented here, right? And this is a bit of a cautionary tale. Right? We have a king who is flouting the social norms. He's flouting the rules of society in this era, which say that young men and women should marry and have children and procreate and pass, can create the next generation. And he's violating that social norm by keeping his daughter, a princess of royal blood, with him, instead of using her to create an alliance and allowing her to move on with her life. Right. So, Leia, it's okay. I'm teasing. I love that you love the Salerno reference too. Love it. So, the king he comes up with a ploy that will make it look like he's satisfying the social norms without actually satisfying the social norms. And so the cautionary tale here is that, you can't pretend to, you can't skirt around the rules, you can't pretend to follow the rules when you're not really following the rules. You will be punished for doing that, right? That's all bound up here. There's a morality tale contained within this as well. It's not just a sad love story. Right? So there's a young man in the country, the son of a count. He's refined and he's handsome. He undertakes great deeds. So by great deeds, when in a medieval literary context, when they talk about undertaking great deeds, they're generally talking about deeds of arms. They're not talking about succoring the poor or feats of strength. They're talking about deeds of arms. And this is part of that rising culture in the 12th century throughout Europe of knights errant, of knights traveling around from tournament to tournament. William the Marshal is a prime example of this, traveling around from tournament to tournament and engaging in deeds of arms, i.e. either jousting or foot combat. And it was very dangerous. In the 12th century, it had not really reached the level of ritualization that it reaches in later eras of the Middle Ages. 12th century deeding is very dangerous, very often resulted in lost body parts, very often resulted in death. So this is a sport that comes with real serious risks and common risks. Even if you didn't die on the field, there was a chance you would die of your wounds from infection. The way most knights died, by the way. They didn't die in glorious battle. They usually died several days later of their wounds. Spoiler alert. So this young man is going around and undertaking great deeds and apparently walking away unscathed. So that's impressive, right? So this is all part of the story. Probably that wouldn't have been the reality. He probably would have at least had some pretty severe cuts and lacerations that needed to be stitched up and healed. So he frequented the court of the king. He stayed there quite often. So this also tells us, this gives us a window into 12th century, the life of 12th century nobility, right? That they actually did travel around a little bit, at least, because not only was he traveling around to these deeds of arms, he was also leaving his own lands and going and staying at the court of the king. And so, he would actually be given lodging there. He would be put up. It was part of, this was part of the king building his own renown, having people from other places visit him and hosting them and feeding them was a way that the king could exert soft power. A medieval king could exert soft power. Right. Yeah. Jim O'Neill, gangrene, 100% gangrene. Septicemia was a pretty common way for people to die. It was knights didn't generally die glorious deaths. Or dysentery. Nothing like pooping yourself to death for the win. Okay, back to our romance and soft power. Royal soft power. So yeah, the king hosting most kings throughout medieval Europe would host visitors on a regular basis, and visitors would actually document their visits too. So that's how we get an idea of the foreign perception of various leaders throughout medieval Europe, because of these traveling knights who go around and visit the court and participate in some deeds of arms and then move on to the next court. And yes, they would frequently be hosted gratis as a form of hospitality, because it was a form of soft power, because then that visitor would go back to their own lands and spread the renown, the tales of the glories of the places they had visited. Death by doctors, Captain says. Yeah. Death by doctor or in spite of. Yes, so for certain our knight, he is the son of a count. We don't know if he's the first son. He may or may not be. Very often second sons were particularly desperate to prove themselves and were particularly desperate to make a good match, to find an heiress so that they could then take over the lands of their or help rule anyway, the lands of their lady wife. So there's this whole affair that takes place between them, right? So he pleaded with her to grant him her love and become his mistress. Now, here we modern people might hear that word mistress and we assume that there's some kind of carnal activity happening here, some kind of actual sexual interaction. That is not what the word mistress necessarily means in the context of medieval fin amour, this refined love that took place between members, upper aristocrats of her rank, of a royal princess. This is a story, right? This isn't history. This is a story. So it is more likely in the context of this story that mistress is the idea of this fan amour, this courtly love, as the Victorians, I think it was the Victorians who called it that she is the mistress of his heart, right? She's the mistress of his heart, not that she is his side piece. So I just want to clarify that. I don't think it's that I do not think that it is side piece at all. I think we're talking about actual love, the love itself, the emotion. Like he's asking her to grant him her love. And finally she did, and he humbly thanked her for it, right? So we're talking about the emotion. She finally admits that she loves him as well and that she is in love with him, right? So there's a question. Haas Create says, I'm referring to the wedding. So did these second sons marry these heiresses to take their lands? Not to take their lands so much, but so that they would have lands that they could rule over. It wasn't necessarily that, they take the lands and she's out. No, no, no. In many places, the heiress is still the regnant princess in capital P, right? She's still the regnant countess. She's still the regnant duchess. She's still the regnant lady. He's the consort. He's the side piece, but their children, his son, will at least have something to inherit, right? So it wasn't in most of the cases where a second son or a third son or fourth son would marry an heiress, or even the first son marries an heiress, she retains rights of rulership of her lands if she is in fact the heiress. And that can often cause problems because you end up with courtiers who are loyal to the lady, but not to her husband, especially the later you get in the Middle Ages. This can cause issues. Maximilian had a lot of issues trying to keep the Low Countries under control after Mary of Burgundy died because they were loyal to her. They weren't loyal to him. He was an Austrian foreign upstart. They had no loyalty to him. So yeah. It was, yeah. If it was the case of, the first son marrying an heiress, then it was just to create a bigger dynasty. Then it was a dynastic match. But even still, the lady, by medieval law in most places, retained rulership. There are some exceptions there. France has the stupid Salic law nonsense, which was put in place to prevent a French princess from inheriting, oh God, I think it was under the early Capetian dynasty, so that it would go to another branch of the family and couldn't go to this one branch. And then from forever after, France could no longer have regnant queens. But they came to regret that throughout various points of history. Yeah. So the second son hopes their big brother dies to inherit the big brother's land. Yeah. House Creates. There is certainly there probably was a certain feeling like that if the second son was ambitious. Don't mistake me. Not all second sons were ambitious. Not all third sons were ambitious. Some of them liked being the spare and were happy with that arrangement if they had enough resources to live comfortably. Let's see, 2025. Heath says the warning is King's trying to over control his grief, and he brought more grief for himself and his kingdom. 100%. 2025 Heath. Let me see. Hoscrate says fascinating. I thought when a guy married his wife's land became his. Yeah, a lot of people think that, but in most places that was not the case. In the case of Spain, when Fernando and Isabella married in the 1470s, I think 1460s maybe when they married, or 1470s, maybe the 1470s. Anyway, when Isabella of Castilla Leon married Fernando of Aragon, she stayed the queen regnant of Castilla Leon, and he stayed the king regnant of Aragon. And then when she died, it was supposed to be Juana, her daughter, who inherited the crown and was supposed to be queen regnant, not him. The Castilians wanted nothing to do with Fernando. They didn't trust him. They didn't obey him. They didn't follow him. So yeah, that's a common misconception. A lot of the laws about women not inheriting are post-medieval. And not being able to take up rulership are post-medieval, or are a completely modern misconception. Medieval gender is so hard for us to understand now. Yeah, gender, there's a lot of baggage. We modern people bring a lot of baggage to historical discussions about gender roles, about the way that men and or women and or other other identities experienced life in the Middle Ages, about the legalities of it, because we bring a lot of later historians' biases to the table without even realizing it. Is that the name in Scandinavian countries? Is Huskreitz, if you could say, is what the name in Scandinavian countries? I'm not certain. I'm not certain what we're referring to there. Okay, let me see. Okay, all questions addressed. While Huskreitz clarifies is what the name in Scandinavian countries, I will proceed. Right, so we have this love affair between them. And when I say love affair, again, please divorce yourself from the modern idea of a love affair. This is a tale of courtly love. And this is a tale of courtly love gone very, very awry. But it's a tale of courtly love. And so we are most likely not talking about the physical act of love. We're talking about the emotional act, right? Which is why they say they often conversed together. They talked. They actually engaged on a real level. And they loved each other truly. And as much as they could, they hid their love so that no one would discover it, right? But it was painful to them. The restraint disturbed them greatly. But the young man decided he would rather suffer the pain of hiding the love than be too hasty in his love and lose everything. And that's the reference. That's kind of what really underscores the idea that it is not a physical love. It is an emotional one. Okay, the comment about Huskreitz is the same laws of inheritance for men and women who got the land upon marriage. Is that a Scandinavian? That was also, as far as I know, a practice in Scandinavia. But there are different, like Scandinavia is not a monolith. Scandinavia certainly has a much more egalitarian society, going way further back. And egalitarian, there's an interesting correlation historically between harsh climates and egalitarian societies, and comfortable, pleasant tropical climates and in egalitarian societies. The more that everyone has to pitch in, the more that everyone must pull their weight in order to survive, the more that you have an egalitarian society. When women are essential to the survival of the tribe, in quotes, then you have an egalitarian society, nearly always. When women are not essential, then men decide that they're secondary, and then you have unequal societies. Think about most of the societies in the Mediterranean, from ancient Rome, the various ancient Greek city-states, all the way going forward. They tend to be very unequal. Women tend to be on the bottom of those societies, both legally and socially. Whereas the further north you go, the more equal women get. Same thing in Asia. Mongolia, men and women, very, very equal. Not necessarily equal in the sense of, everyone doing the same thing, but a lot more overlap and equal rights, right? So, yeah. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. Keeping a Christian, they waited so pure for the love story. Yep. And they die in that state, sadly. So it came that the young man, who was so wise, so brave, so handsome, earnestly begged her to run away with him because he could no longer tolerate the pain. Right. So he wants to take her away. And she says, "No, I can't. You can't do that. I know that you couldn't carry me up the mountain. You aren't strong enough. And if I ran away with you, I would hurt my father so much." So this also, there's also this weird misconception that in the Middle Ages, parents didn't love their children, children didn't love their parents. This story underscores the idea that that is not true. That is not true. And you could say, well, it's a story. Of course, it's going to be fiction, so it doesn't necessarily reflect reality. On the other hand, this is a story to which people should be able to relate because it's a morality tale, right? So it's a story to which people should be able to relate, which means it shouldn't have things that are so concepts, fundamental plot points that are so foreign that no one can relate to the story. So I'm pretty certain that this is yet more examples of how there was love between parents and their children, both in both directions, and how it was profound and how it was impactful and actually factored into people's decision making. Because the princess here, even though she's experiencing this crazy infatuation, who knows if it's real love, right? They're young, they're fresh in their relationship, relatively speaking. It could still be in the infatuation phase, but infatuation is more dangerous than a more seasoned love, because infatuation chemicals make you do crazy things, right? So, but instead of following those urges and running away, which she knows, she says, if I ran away with you, my father would be grief-stricken and angry and would suffer for the rest of his life. So she doesn't want to hurt him that way, right? She doesn't want to hurt him that way. But she says, this is really funny. She says, you'll have to think of another scheme because I don't want to hear any more of this one. And then almost instantly, she presents him with a scheme. So this is, I'm not certain if Marie did this intentionally, but this could be one of those cases of her, saying, well, you're the big, strong knight. You're the clever knight. You need to come up with a better idea. By the way, I have this idea. trying to inform his idea by presenting her own, because she immediately says, here, we're to Salerno, Leia. I have a relative in Salerno, right? A rich woman with lots of property. So Salerno is in Italy, and it's sort of, if you look on it on a map, it is famous in the Middle Ages for being a center of medicine. And it is famous for a place where women are doctors, where women are physicians. And we have that in the 12th century. That is already known because it is a fundamental part of this story, right? So she says, I have a relative in Salerno. And when I first read this, I thought, oh, she has an uncle. No, a rich woman in Salerno with lots of property. She's lived there for more than 30 years. She has practiced the medical arts for so long that she's an expert in medicines. So a couple of things here. She's lived there for 30 years, so she's not from Salerno. And so it is possible that this woman is from Normandy originally. This is the princess's aunt. So this woman has traveled from Normandy, moved from Normandy all the way to Salerno. She owns her own property. She's wealthy, and she's a practitioner of the medical arts. She is a doctor. And that ties in with the book that is commonly known as the Trotula, the Trota of Salerno, right? This is a medical manual that dates to the 12th century, seems to have possibly been written by a woman, a female physician, and it's a book of gynecology. It's a book of beauty treatments for women. It's a book of women's healthcare from the 12th century, ostensibly written by women for women, or for men who treat women. And that's all contemporary. This story is contemporary to that primary source. So you've got this literary reference to Salerno being a place where women practice medicine. And then we have a nonfiction contemporary reference to women practicing medicine in Salerno. So it's wonderful. And it's really interesting that this story informs us just how far-flung Salerno's reputation was in the 12th century for being a great center of the medical arts. And one of the reasons that Salerno was such a center of the medical learning is because it's at the crossroads of the Mediterranean. And so you have Arab physicians who go there to teach and study. You have Jewish physicians who go there to teach and study. You have Christian physicians from all over the known world, not just Europe. You have people traveling up from Africa to go and study and practice in Salerno, from the Levant, from Europe, from north to south, right? Salerno in this area is this beautiful melting pot of knowledge and innovation and ideas where people from different religions live peacefully together, right? Because this is all, I'm pretty certain that Salerno I think, thinking about it now, I think Salerno fell under the court of Roger of Sicily in this era. Which was another of these great 12th century Renaissance courts of multicultural melting pot, innovation in arts, in sciences, in philosophy, in medicine, right? So yeah, I love that reference here so much, so much. Let me see. A long way away and a quest to get the magic potion. So yeah, Oz's comment is a good one. So here we have the princess, right? It's a quest. It's a quest. He's being sent on a quest. How much more knightly can it get, right? But it's a little bit of an inversion of the quest, right? Because he's not going to go get a weapon, a violent weapon. He's not going to go find a sword. He's not going to go slay a dragon. He's not going to go find a wise man in the mountains. He's going to go find a wise, rich woman in Salerno and get a potion from her, right? So I have a relative in Salerno, a rich woman. She's an expert in medicine. She knows herbs and roots so well that if you want to go to her bringing a letter from me with you and tell her your problem, she'll take an interest in it. And then she'll make up such prescriptions and give you such potions that they will fortify you and give you lots of strength. When you return to this region, you'll ask your father for me. He'll think you're just a child. He'll agree. And then he will go through the ritual of you carrying me up the mountain, and you should be fine because of this potion, this strength-giving potion, right? So yeah, comments, questions. Let me see. Salerno was a happening place. It really was. Yeah. Oops. There's Normans everywhere you look. Yeah. So the Normans, the 12th century, the 11th and 12th century, for the Normans, and this definitely looks back, this is definitely a memory of sort of the glory, the heyday of the Normans, right? Because in the 11th century, the Normans start going on the move everywhere, right? They go to England, starting in the 11th century into the 12th century. They go to England, they go to Ireland, they go down into the Mediterranean and conquer shit, right? And set up shop. Right. So this is the heyday of the Normans, and this definitely reflects back on that idea. Yeah, the Normans are everywhere. Contessa, last week you touched on the topic of medieval social duty to the poor encouraged by the church, and that the Industrial Revolution further disenfranchised the poor. I'd love to hear more. Yes, 100%. Oh God, is that Irish? Oh God, I do not. My dearest daughter of this family, I do not want to mispronounce your name because I do not do well at reading Gaelic, reading Irish Gaelic. So if you don't mind, I'll call you Nick, which I know just means daughter of, unless you give me a more easily pronounceable name to call you by. I don't want to butcher your name. I will absolutely talk about about the way that, yeah, I will address that topic in a little bit. It's going to come up when we do our reading about the peasant, the 15th century Italian peasant, 100%. Yeah, so here we are. She's sending him to Salerno. Normandy to Salerno is one hell of a journey. And the best way to go there in this era would not have been overland. Honestly, he should get on a ship. He's in Normandy. He should just get on a ship and go, because overland, super dangerous, fraught with perils from people to weather. Definitely the ship would be the way to go. But he doesn't go by ship. He goes by land, because he goes off to his own country. Again, the idea of country, as we understand it, is not the medieval idea of country. By country, they really just mean his lands. It's just, I'm confident. I wish, the only thing I don't like about this book, this translation, is that it does not provide a side-by-side version with the original French, because there's so many times, I'm a professional translator, some of you know, and there's so many times when I want to compare against the original French because I don't trust their translations so much. Because I'm going to bet that it's probably pays is the word for country, and that literally just means lands in this case. So he supplies himself with rich clothes, gotta look good. Boys gotta look good to go on his quest. Nice. For any of you seeking to undertake a proper medieval deed of arms and or quest, remember, you have to look good. Dress sharp, my friend. He has money, good, although interestingly, it doesn't say letters of credit. So this is the era when letters of credit are starting to arise. The Templars have set up banks everywhere, in most of the major cities, whereby you go to their bank, you deposit cash, they give you a letter of credit, you take it with you, and then whenever you get where you're going, you submit your letter of credit, and then they'll give you cash. It was a way to, it's the origins of the modern banking system. It was a way to bring money with you because you would be required to prove your identity on the other end, right? So it was a way to bring money with you without risking having it stolen. Yeah. Because it's very easy to hide a letter of credit, right? It's really hard to hide coinage. But he doesn't. He brings money, nothing about letters of credit. It's a fairy tale basically, so we'll just suspend our disbelief here. He brings palfreys and pack mules. Palfreys are nice riding horses. Destrier would be a war horse. So clearly he is not going out to engage in war. A palfrey is a nice riding horse that is not trained to be deadly on the battlefield. Medieval knights, the horses that medieval knights rode into battle were not the same ones they took on pleasure rides, because medieval knights, their horses were trained to be a weapon in and of themselves. They were violent. So keep that in mind. Yeah, traveler's checks. Oz says traveler's checks, exactly. Yep, invented thanks to the Crusades. Housecreates, the church and kings were jealous of the Templars. They were so rich. Yep, they did eventually get so rich, and that's why we have Black Friday. That is the origin of Black Friday, the real Black Friday. That was the biggest, one of the most amazing actual real conspiracies that really, in my opinion, it's super impressive because letters were exchanged across Europe from the Pope to various kings so that everyone on the same day, coordinated attack, would raid the local Templars chapter house, arrest them all, and take all of their wealth so that no one knew it was going to happen before it happened. Coordinating a single day attack like that, ambush like that across Europe, medieval Europe, that is super impressive for the Middle Ages. So it's horrifying what they did and the reason they did it, but it's impressive nevertheless. Okay, back to our story. So he has palfreys and pack mules. So pack mules are, of course, because he's not just going with he needs something to carry his cool clothing, right? So clearly he's going with multiple changes of clothes. And of course, he took his most trustworthy henchmen, his men, right? And he made it. He went. It just, nothing happened on the way, apparently. It was a completely uneventful journey. This is definitely a fairy tale in some ways. He went to stay in Salerno to consult his beloved's aunt. He gave her the letter, she read it in its entirety, and then she interviewed him to know more about it. She strengthened him with medicines and gave him such a potion that no matter how fatigued he might be, no matter how constrained or burdened, the potion would revive his entire body, even to the veins and the bones. Right? So, she poured the potion into a bottle and he took it back to his own land. Great, right? So we have, Templars equals, Knights Templars equals Black Friday. Yep, Housecreates, that's the day on which everything was, they were all arrested, all the ones that could be found, they were all arrested, their wealth, their goods and their wealth was confiscated, and then they were all tried and put to death. Yeah, fun times. Jim O'Neill says, I would love to take a walk to the basement of the Vatican. Yeah, Jim, 100%, my friend. Housecreate says, guess the medicine wore off on its way back. Yeah, well, it's a long trip to Normandy from Salerno, especially if you're going overland. He really went the long way. Good God, man. Okay, so he goes back joyful and happy. He goes straight to the king to ask for his daughter. Of course, the king doesn't even try to refuse him. Why would he? He thinks this kid's going to fail, right? He views this young man as a child, basically, which the daughter tells him he will do, and he does. So he names and sets a date for this feat, right? He wants there to be a large audience to witness it, everyone he can get. He wouldn't let anyone stay behind. Right. The damsel prepared herself, and this is an interesting point. The damsel prepares herself by fasting and dieting. So in case you all were wondering whether the concept of dieting to lose weight was modern, it is not. It is very clearly a medieval idea. Now, Why she's fasting and dieting is not to have a better figure. In fact, by medieval standards, she probably would have looked too skinny at the end of this process, honestly. They want their women not to be grotesquely round, but they want them to have some flesh on their bones, right? To show that they're not poor and starving. So she might have actually dieted to the point of being less beautiful by the 12th century aesthetics. She fasted and she dieted. She cut down on her eating because she desired to help her lover. So she's trying to be as low weight as possible to facilitate this. And as I was reading this the first time, I honestly thought to myself, well, she needs to make sure she doesn't wear all the layers she would normally be wearing in the 12th century. And lo, it says she wore nothing except her chemise. Her smock would be the 15th century English word, or the 12th century English word would be smocka, right? So yeah, she's wearing nothing but her undergown, basically. For those who are wondering, the chemise is this white layer that I'm wearing here. This is a smock in 15th century English, a camicia in 15th century Italian, right? This is the white linen layer that you wear against your skin. So this is also a fairy tale, in my opinion, because she's wearing nothing but her underwear. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy, because that would have been so socially unacceptable, but it's not commented on here. It's not commented on. And possibly it could be that at this point, everyone, all of these courtiers, all of these people who are witnessing this, they might decide to let it pass because they want her to finally have the next stage in her life. They want the social norms to be fulfilled. And so there's kind of this implication that one social norm, i.e. being fully dressed and dressed appropriately, it's okay to violate one social norm if it means that a greater and more important social norm, i.e. the princess marrying and having children, is fulfilled, right? That's kind of how I read this, because otherwise, in many other stories, a woman being dressed in nothing but her smock is viewed as her being naked and as being a thing of shame. Right. So yeah, Oscreate said he should have taken a nap before his trial. Yeah, for certain. Okay, so here we are. We're at the base of the mountain. She's wearing nothing but her chemise. It's white and linen. Now, I'm going to tell you that her chemise in this era, in the 12th century, it probably goes up to her neck. They actually went up pretty high. In this era, garments, men and women, go all the way up to the neck. It's just the fashion of the time. It's just the way they are. So probably her smock also comes all the way up to her neck. So there isn't really anything indecent showing, except that you can probably see the outlines of certain parts of her body. Okay, so he lifts her up into his arms. He gives her the small phial containing the potion so she can carry it for him, so that she can give it to him while they're en route, right? This is like a marathoner who's running and he takes the cup of water as he's passing by the crowd and drinks it or tosses it on his face as he's going. Because remember, he's not supposed to stop and rest or he loses, right? So he prepares. They're prepared. They should be able to do this, right? He's got his booster shot, the phial, in her hand. They're ready to go. They have a plan. Should work. But what happens? So there's so many different levels to this morality tale. I really love it. What happens that basically prevents their plan from actually coming to fruition? Is it an act of God? Does Mother Nature strike them down? No. It's his pride. It's his pride, which is one of the 7 deadly sins. And in this case, his pride literally kills him, not a metaphor. So they're halfway up the mountain. It says he climbed until he was halfway up. Oh, and of course, I'm afraid the potion did him little good because he was entirely lacking in control. So there is no time limit on this feat, right? It's not as though he is racing a sand or a water clock, because that's the kind of clock they would have had in the 12th century. He's not racing any kind of clock. He's not racing the sun. There is no time limit. So he can take his time. Slow and steady wins the race, right? Aesop's fables. And Aesop's fables were known in the 12th century, by the way. So this could be a human rendering, pulling on that idea of slow and steady wins the race. Fast and erratic will lose the race, right? Applying it to the humans in this story. And we know that Marie had read, she actually references Aesop's fables multiple times. So yeah, we know she was aware of them, that she knew those stories, right? So he tears off at top speed. They get halfway up the mountain, and it says in his joy for his beloved, he forgot his potion. Okay, but she notices he's growing weak. She says, love, drink. I know you're getting tired. Now it's time to regain your strength. Here comes pride. The youth answers, sweetheart, my heart is very strong. I wouldn't stop for any price, not even long enough to take a drink, so long as I can still move an inch, right? He says, if I did, the crowd would raise a racket. They would distract me. I don't want to stop here. But it's really his pride. Honestly, it's his pride. He wants to be able to do this without any other assistance. Oz says, taking the potion might be seen as cheating. His love gave him the strength to get up the mountain. Oz possibly, except that he already had the first doses that the physician in Salerno gave him. But yeah, possibly, maybe at this point, he might be viewing the potion as a way of cheating, and it should be his love, should be enough to get him up. Either way, it's pride. She says, the maiden begs him, dearest, take your medicine. But he wouldn't listen or take her advice. In great anguish, he staggers on. He reaches the top of the mountain. They get there. They reach the top. Goal achieved, right? He does it. He does, in fact, do it. He does get to the top of the mountain, but he has strained himself so much. He has exerted himself so much that he pays with his life, that he dies. He fell there and he did not rise again. The life went out of his body, right? So he succeeds, and yet to no avail, right? The maiden looked down at her lover. She thought he had fainted. She knelt beside him, attempting to give him his potion, but he didn't respond. That is how he died, as I've told you. The maiden grieved for him with loud cries. She emptied, and here's the teleological part of the story. She emptied and threw away the bottle that contained the potion. And this is the mythical part, right? This is the mythical core of this story. There are so many origin myths that have this idea in them, although usually involving bodily juices of certain kinds. I'm thinking of Kronos and how the sea became to be foamy, and how Venus was actually born. Anyway, how Aphrodite was actually born. Anyway, you've got this bottle, and apparently this bottle has so much potion in it, mythical part, that the mountain is well doused with it. The entire region and countryside are covered in it, and were much improved thereby, because now many a fine herb that are found there to this day owes their start to that potion. So because this potion is a concoction consisting of all of these herbs and roots, the idea is that the potion basically made those herbs and roots magically grow in this part of the world. And that's why it's an origin story. And there's also an understanding, there's also this botanical understanding, this paleobotanical understanding, that there are herbs in this place that maybe aren't from there, that come from a distant place, that maybe the Romans actually brought with them, right? That the Celts brought with them, that these successive waves of migrants and invaders brought with them. But this is a neater explanation for that, right? That there was this potion in this bottle, and because the princess was grieving, she threw away the bottle. She emptied the bottle and threw it away, scattering it everywhere, right? Yeah, I just love this little part. I wonder if the elevation difference didn't help. I mean, it would help some, but to cover the entire region and countryside is pretty That's pretty far. The magic potion results in fertile land, right? Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Okay, so we have this teleological story here, the origin story of why there are all these fine herbs now in this region. Now the damsel, we shall tell you about her. When she knew she had lost her lover, you never saw anyone so sad. She lay down and stretched out beside him. She took him in her arms and pressed him to her. She kissed his eyes and lips again and again. Sorrow for him struck deep in her heart, and thus she died there as well. The maid who is so brave, so wise, so beautiful. Right. So the idea of dying from grief is medically proven in this day. You can die from grief. It is a thing that can kill you. And so even though we might think, oh, it's a love story, it's a fantasy, it's a fairy tale, it's a fantasy story, it's a myth. But no, that is people do really die of grief. This is a real thing. The king and the others who were waiting for them, when they saw they weren't returning, went after them and found them. The king fell down in a faint. When he could speak again, he grieved greatly, and so did all the strangers. They stayed there mourning for 3 days. Then they ordered a marble tomb and placed the 2 young people inside it. On the advice of all those present, they buried them on the mountain summit, and at last they went away. Right. Because of the sad adventure of these 2 young lovers, this place is now called the Mount of the 2 Lovers. Right. So it's an origin story also for that place, for why it's called that. It's an origin story for the plants, the flora that is found there. But also, yeah, there is definitely, for there was never a story so woe as that of Juliet and her Romeo. Yes, Oz, exactly. So, the king and the others, they find them just like Romeo and Juliet are found. And the king falls down in a faint. He has a double grief, right? So by violating the natural social order, by keeping his marriageable daughter with him and denying her the chance to marry, denying her the next stage in life, by letting her become part of the medieval social world, of fulfilling her role in medieval society, he has now suffered. He's been punished. He has now lost his daughter as well. But they were so moved by the scene that they met that they have a marble tomb built. And I will tell you, marble is not native to Normandy. So that marble has to be imported. And the listener or reader in the 12th century would have picked up on that. That would have tipped off to them, oh my, this is a very special tomb, right? They ordered a marble tomb. The young lovers were entombed inside of it, and then they were interred on the mountain's summit. And then they went away. So there is this whole very complex mourning process involving the creation of a tomb, the interment, and then finally, when it is done, they depart. And so we have here it's not a long story, but there's so many different complexities, so many implications, so many levels of meaning that are conveyed within it. I'm just so impressed by Marie's writing, right? The different dimensions that she is able to impart to what at its heart seems like a simple adventure story, right? A simple romance. Yeah. Another trip to Italy. Yeah, Oz25 says. And then there was another follow-up story. There was a the tangential story, right? The side quest story about the person who got sent to go and purchase marble from Carrera. Right? Another trip to Italy. Jim says, their potions are tonics today, wouldn't you say? Yes. So Jim, I would definitely agree. Potion, you're right. So Jim's question is very valid. Are we talking about magic potions? No. They're talking about tonics. They're talking about remedies. They're talking about basically liquid medicine, right? That's the word potion in this era does not imply magic. Modernly, we say potion, and most people automatically add the word magic in their mind. But the reality is that we have the expression magic potion because potion doesn't imply magic. So yes, Jim, definitely, we might call it a tonic today. And probably, depending on the herbs and roots that were used, there was very likely strength or energy imparting properties, because a lot of herbs and a lot of roots will give you a burst of energy through their active ingredients. So it is possible that the aunt, the physician, that the lady aunt physician may have well known which herbs and roots that would give strength, that would give energy, that would actually give vitality, because there are herbs and roots that were available in 12th century Europe that would have done that. So it is possibly not snake oil. It is possibly not a fake concoction. Yeah, it's possible that if he had paced himself, if the Count's son, if our knight, our hero, had paced himself, and if he had taken the potion when it was offered to him by his lady love, he may have actually made it and not died of exhaustion. Yep. Okay, are there any final questions about Marie de France's Les Deux Amants, the two lovers? The two lovers, yeah. I liked it because it was short. I liked it because it's short. I mean, I don't mind a long story, but for reading purposes, for your sake, I like to make sure that we can get through it all easily, comfortably together in the time that we have. I liked it because there are so many layers, so many hints about the mythical past relative to the 12th century, about the actual historical past, the references to Neustria, the present in the 12th century, Salerno as a known center of learning and where there were women physicians. There's just so many great little details in here that I just really love. That really, for those of you especially who are interested in 12th century reenactment, daily life in the 12th century, Marie's Lay are a really fantastic place to get additional information that you might not get from chronicles, and you certainly aren't going to get from your average history book these days. Oz says, yes, good point. Oz 25 notes, message that men should listen to their women. Yes, that is definitely implied there. And it is known, it is a known fact. It was known even at the time in Britannia that there was definitely, in Brittany, that there was definitely a more equal relationship between men and women. And there were a lot of countesses or duchesses of Britannia who were countesses or duchesses in their own right. Right. So yeah, there is definitely the idea. I don't disagree with that. I don't think that's a modern interpretation or misinterpretation. I think that is an accurate reflection of something Marie is trying to tell her reader here. When your lady, when your lover, when your lady, when your wife, when your mother, when your sister gives you advice, you should listen to it. Okay. Moving on. So there was a question about poverty in the Middle Ages, because I have often observed, I'm going to just take a sip of tea. Tea time, everyone. Take a sip of your beverage of choice. I have a Dragonwell green tea this morning. No tea, proper tea, as in tea leaf, steeped tea leaves, not medieval Europe in the least. Not at all. Wasn't there yet. But they did have tisanes in medieval Europe. A tisane, for those who are wondering, it's an herbal tea. It's a tea. It is herbs, it is leaves, blossoms, roots, seeds steeped in hot water. And we know that they did this not only medicinally across medieval Europe, but we actually have recipes for beverages that are to be served socially and not purely medicinal at all. For example, the Ménagier de Paris contains several recipes for beverages that you can make and then serve to your guests. And they do indeed involve roots and seeds and blossoms, and leaves, mostly leaves and blossoms, honestly, in the case of the Ménagier de Paris. Yeah, so they did have that steep, leaves and blossoms steeped in hot water, no problem, just not tea leaves in Europe. In Asia, 100%. Tea is being, by the 6th century, basically, tea from tea leaves is being consumed everywhere in Asia by the 6th century AD, thanks to the spread of Buddhism primarily. Buddhism actually takes tea with it because tea was a beverage that was promoted by Buddhist monks because, unlike alcohol, tea didn't lead to violent behavior. And so tea becomes the official beverage of Buddhism. And so where Buddhism goes, so too goes tea. And that's how tea came to Korea, and that's how tea came to Japan, apparently. When did teacups get handles in Europe? Well, so cups have had handles. So cups in general have had handles in Europe. I think the earliest handled cup I've seen is 12th or 13th century. And there might be earlier, I just haven't necessarily seen it. So the idea of cups having handles is not new to Europe. Tea doesn't get to Europe until the 17th century. And the first shipment of tea to arrive at the royal court, I forget which court it was. It was a gift from an Eastern potentate, and it arrives, and the king looks at it and says, "What would we do with these dead leaves?" And they throw it out, even though it's super valuable. Basically, there were already cups with handles by the time tea comes along. So I expect probably that, by the time tea is being consumed, the cups just have handles already. That's kind of my assumption. Yeah, because again, tea doesn't really get to Europe until the 17th century. And it seems to be spread into England by Catherine of Braganza, who is an infanta from Portugal, right? And Portugal is one of the first places to actually get and start drinking tea in Europe because of their trade connections, right? So she is, as far as I know, she is the one who's attributed with bringing tea to England in the 17th century when she marries Charles II. Okay, so next in our story, we have, this is a book that you can get yourself if you want. It's very interesting. The Renaissance in the Fields. And this is a biography of a 15th century Tuscan peasant, right? And his name is Benedetto del Masarizia, right? So Benedetto del Masarizia. And so first off, what do you all think of when you think of peasant? Okay. What image comes to mind? Unfortunately, I think the image that will come to mind is probably not a correct one necessarily, unless they were actually working in the fields. Most peasants dressed pretty nicely. I mean, I'm not talking about silk, velvet, and gold cloth of gold, but nice wool, nice linen, maybe even occasionally a special garment made out of silk, right? Peasants for most places in medieval Europe, across a large part of the Middle Ages, especially the later you get into the Middle Ages, they actually had a fair number of assets, and they were literate. They could keep their own books. They kept records. They kept financial records. It's just that many of these records don't necessarily survive. They can be referenced by other people who did keep records. But very occasionally, their records do survive. And that is the case, the miraculous case of Benedetto del Masarizia, right? I think of a grafter. Jamesy, you think of a grafter? I think of a hard worker in labor. Yep. That's reasonable. Now, peasants certainly, they did work hard. But even amongst the peasantry, there were different levels, right? There were peasants who were masters of estates, basically, and they had lots of laborers working under them. So there were peasants who didn't actually do the work themselves. They didn't do the actual tilling of the fields themselves. They had laborers for that. There were peasants who couldn't afford to have many laborers and did a lot of the work themselves. Leah says, I think of someone who pays taxes with food or labor. Yep. And certainly in different times and places, that was true. But as the Middle Ages progresses on, increasingly peasants are paying taxes with cash, with coin, instead of with goods. Although some of you may, if you're in Germany, Saint Schoine, tithe barns you find these all across Europe. If you live in a place in Europe that has a tithe barn, the tithe barn was literally where the church would collect the tithe in goods from the peasantry mostly, where the peasants, depending on the product that they farmed, would pay a tenth of their produce, their product, to the church. And the Saint Schoine, the tithe barn, is where all of those things were collected and stored. So if you were a vintner, if you grew grapes, then it would be grapes or wine. If you were a peasant who grew, grain, corn as it was called in medieval English, which is not maize, then it would be grain, right? So that still was happening, but kind of that happens less and less as the Middle Ages wane on and coin becomes more common. Oz says anyone who wasn't a noble or clergy was a peasant then. No, a peasant is a farmer. A peasant is a farmer. Literally, it comes from the French paysan, and it is a farmer. It's someone who farms, who works the land, who owns a farm but doesn't have any kind of rank, or who works a farm but paying rent usually, but they work the farm, they run the farm. That's a peasant. So you had other kinds of workers who weren't peasants. Craftsmen were neither the noble nor merchants. They were craftsmen, but they weren't peasants. Merchants are not noble, but are peasants, are not peasants, right? So peasant literally is just a farmer. And there were different kinds of peasants. That, like I said, there were the executive peasants, the chief executive officer peasants. There were the laborer peasants, right? So yeah, but basically kind of anyone involved in farming in the Middle Ages is, directly involved, not a lord who has farms under them. Anyone directly involved in farming was a peasant. Let me see. South Wales had tithe barns. Yep, I thought they might. I thought they might, Oz. 100%. Peasants and pheasants. Okay, so here we have the remarkable survival of two booklets of Mayo and Benedetto del Masarizia, right? And they are located in Siena. So have any of you been to Siena? Siena is amazing. It is a beautiful medieval city, and it has such stunning 14th century art. It really is remarkable, right? So if you want, and the city itself is beautiful, go into the town hall, it's stunning. I love Siena. Siena is great. Funny story about going to Siena. I went to Siena dressed in my full 1480 Florentine ensemble because in that era, Siena was under the governance of Florence. And most people really loved it. Loved it. But there was one woman, a shopkeeper, who knew better. She knew that what I was wearing was Florentine, and she actually knows how the Sienese dressed in the 14th and 15th century. And she said to me in Italian, but she said to me basically, next time you come back to Siena, make sure you come in Sienese clothing. She was joking a little bit, but there was also a little bit of earnestness to her statement. So it's funny that the Sienese still feel a certain some way about Florence having taken them over in the early 15th century. The heyday for Siena is definitely the 14th century, and that's when all those beautiful frescoes are from. So she was encouraging me in her own way to make 14th century Sienese clothing to wear to Siena. And I do kind of want to do that because the clothes that are depicted on all the beautiful frescoes from Siena are just so special and stunning and unique. Yep. Oh, thank you, Jamesy. Appreciate that. Oh. Okay, so back to Siena. So Benedetto, he is in the 15th century, and the documents are basically, the earliest date is 1450 and the latest date is 1480. And so it seems to come from this period. So this is definitely the era during which Siena and Siena's territories, fell under the control of Florence. Florence had pretty much become like a major power player at this point in the region. Did I see the tomb of St. Catherine in Siena? I did not go to see her tomb, not on purpose. I didn't avoid it. I just didn't get to it. Yeah. Okay. So I thought I would read to you some selections from this so you can get an idea, a kind of daily life picture of the things that this gentleman had to do on a daily basis, the kinds of things he purchased, the kinds of things he sold, the kind of people who owed him money, the kind of people to whom who he owed money. It's going to actually help you build an idea of the life of a peasant. And it's really funny because the introduction in this book, actually, the Duccio Balestrazzi actually admits, he says, I thought when I started reading this that maybe it was foolish of me because it just seems so banal. He refers to the banality of these entries. But what he means by banality is there's no war is mentioned, no battles are mentioned. This is daily life. To me, that's not banal. That's super exciting, right? This is a window into daily life of the past. Great man history, I have no patience for it. I don't care about it. It bores me, right? I learned great man history so I can provide a frame for daily life, but I'm much more interested in how people lived on a daily basis. I'm interested in the great men and great women from the perspective of how they live their daily lives. I'm less interested in the battles that they fought, unless they die in the battle and all of their goods end up in a Swiss church because of it. Looking at you, Charles the Bold, i.e. the rash. Okay, so let's go ahead and delve in. So again, I'm going to read through a passage and then I'll read through a section and then we'll go back and explore the section in more detail. Yeah, daily life, it's so interesting, right? And you know what? Brief sidebar. I think that is why a lot of people don't like history. They don't enjoy studying history. I mean, at school, right? They don't enjoy history at school because history at school is almost nothing but dates and battles and treaties. Dates and battles and treaties, dates and battles and treaties, right? There is nothing in any of that that can be relatable to the average person because most people are not fighting in battles, are not leading battles, are not signing treaties. So they can't relate to this endless litany of battles and treaties, battles and treaties, battles and treaties, right? But they can relate to what people ate, to how people bathed, to how they dressed, because we too dress and bathe and eat, right? Yeah, bored people creativity. Yeah. Yeah. So I am definitely interested in the daily life much more. I wish that history classes, the subject of history, were taught with a much greater focus on daily life and how that affected people and how daily life led to those battles, those treaties, those economic situations, right? They seem to forget that those battles happen because of daily life, not the other way around. Daily life doesn't happen because of the battles happen because of daily life. So, rant off to this memoir of our dear Benedetto, Meo and Benedetto. Okay, so starting in 1450, on the 6th of March, Meo di Betto from Monte Albuccio paid to us, Francesco and Tommaso Lutti, 7 lire and 10 soldi for pasturing 5 oxen in the year 1450. So here, this is very interesting, just right from the get-go for me. 2 things I wouldn't have known before I read this entry. 1, that a peasant would pay someone else to pasture their oxen, right? They would actually rent land basically so that their oxen could eat. So pasturing oxen, that doesn't mean that they're just in a field. They're eating. This is how the oxen are eating. That is their feet. They're being fed that way. This is the era before feed stores. You don't just pop over to the local feed store, buy a bale of hay and go give it to your oxen. You actually pay someone else to pasture, or rather the other way around. They're being paid for pasturing 5 oxen. So this peasant is being paid to pasture the 5 oxen that belong to this person, right? So this is a source of income, Right? This is how peasants can get ahead of the game. This is supplemental income. So not only are they growing their own crops, right? They're actually getting money by pasturing other people's animals, right? Let me see. Gelbeline says, in school, I thought I was not interested in history. Yeah, Gelbeline. Yeah. Um, if I had only learned the history that I learned in school, I wouldn't have either. But I already took an interest in history when I was like 3. So I came to my history classes with as much knowledge of history and sometimes as my teachers, which, by the way, did not endear me to them because I did not have a social clue and had no idea that teachers would not want to be corrected by their 8-year-old students. I know that now. I understand that you're not supposed to correct the teacher in front of the other students. I didn't know that when I was 8. So it was not easy to be my teacher. I know that. I get that. Rebecca, hello. Welcome. Welcome to Daegu, South Korea. Thank you for joining me from Cleveland. It is getting late where you are, so I'm doubly honored that you're taking the time to join us. Susan says there's a young adult says 12-year-old history. Oh, there's a young adult series called The Royal Diaries. Among the princesses are Sondok, Princess Jahanara, Queen Christina, and some tutors. That's pretty cool. I'm glad there is such a series. Is it based on their actual diaries, do you think, or are they just sort of making it up? Either way, it's cool. I love that. Okay. Also, if you're enjoying, don't forget to like and subscribe. I keep forgetting to do that because I'm so into our conversation and talking about all this stuff that I consistently forget to do that. But please, if you're on a mobile device, double tap your screen, like and subscribe that will like. And then if you would like to know more, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell, because if you don't hit the notification bell and click on all, it won't let you know when I do things like go live. So if you're on Facebook, I don't know how to make it give you notifications when I go live. I'm not certain how that works exactly. So Rebecca, thank you for joining us from Facebook. Yeah. Okay, so I just thought it was so fascinating. Peasants had ways of obtaining supplemental income, so they didn't have to rely on just the success of their crops. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that most peasants could own land and sometimes did own land, depending on where they were in medieval Europe, but very often they rented. And so it was a kind of sharecropping. They would actually pay a rent to the lord. The landlord could be the church. It could be a lord or a lady, king or queen, count, countess, duke, duchess, whatever. They might actually pay rent for their land. Captain Rail says, I often corrected my teachers with knowledge on the subject that was 2 to 3 years more advanced than the class. I got in so much trouble. Yeah, Captain Rail, that was me. I was also very pedantic. I didn't understand that wasn't appreciated. I understand that now. I've improved so much since then. Okay, yeah, Jamesy, you're right. I am such a chatty catty cat. 100%. I accept that label. Okay, so next, today, May 20th, I received 30 lire for a young heifer that I sold, and I am satisfied and fully paid, which money we got from Betto del Masaritilla. Right, so a heifer, in case you don't know, is a female cow. A bull is a male cow that can still have babies. An ox is a male cow that can no longer have babies, can't have babies, can no longer create babies. An ox is a male cow that has been castrated, ergo can no longer sire babies, and a heifer is just a female cow, right? So he received 30 lire for a heifer. And you know, this, sometimes many of you ask me about, you know, how much did such and such a thing cost, right? These kinds of account books / diaries, these memoirs, contain those kinds of details. So now we know that in 1450, as of May, it was possible to get 30 lire for a young heifer. So a young cow is no doubt going to be more valuable and expensive than an older cow, than an older heifer, right? Lots of years of productivity left, both in terms of milk production and in terms of calf production. So, you know, 30 lire is what you could get for a young heifer. And so you have lira and then soldi. So soldi is the soldo is the breakdown, is the unit below lira. Lira is kind of like pound. Yeah. And I do not know the exchange rate in 1450 at this time. But if you think about how much you can buy a cow for, that should give you a rough estimate, keeping in mind that there were many fewer cows in this era than we have now because they hadn't really developed the fine art of industrial farming yet. Okay, so 1451, on this day, December 4th, I received 6 lire, 12 soldi, and 6 denari from Benedetto di Meo di Betto of Montalbuccio as payment for money the aforesaid Meo owed me, which he had got from us a long time ago. And I declare myself fully paid for all dealings I have had with him up to today. So we often think about debt and credit as being a modern societal problem, maybe you could even say, but entries like this underscore that a debt and credit system is a long practiced form of finance, and that you didn't, in this era, you clearly did not have to go to a bank for a loan. You could actually often purchase things on credit from the person who is selling you the thing, and they would actually mark your debt in their account book. And just like now, those debts could actually be passed on, and passed on as an asset, no less. There are wills. In fact, I'm pretty certain it was a will tied to the Shakespeare family that I recently read, where there was a debt that was owed to the person who had died. And in the will, the person who has died, might even be Anne Hathaway, might even be Shakespeare's wife. I think it was Anne Hathaway, it was Shakespeare's wife, where she is owed a debt by a man, and she wants to give money to the poor, specifically for clothes for them, I do believe. And she actually says that I want this amount of money to go to the poor. It's owed me by this other man. You'll have to go to him to get it. So yeah, so there's the idea of credit and debt, not new. The idea of selling a debt on, or that a debt can be viewed as an asset, a debt owed can be viewed as an asset, also not new. So it's just these little details that to connect us again, like how many modern people can relate to that? Oh God, I owe money, or I am owed money. Like that is it's one of these concepts that just doesn't seem to change, right? Okay. Let's see. On the 18th of March, 1451, let me see. No, wait, sorry. That's not the one I wanted to read. There's some really interesting ones in here. Oh, darn it, the markers all fell out. That's okay. On the 22nd of October, 1452, Friar Tommaso di Lottini gave me 8 lire. So this is a friar, which is an uncloistered monk. I received 8 lire from him, 10 soldi in cash, paid by him into my own hand as rent for the house in the neighborhood of Laterino, for which he owes by common consent 12 lire per year. He has had it for 8.5 months. That is, he began paying on the 29th day of September, 1452. On the feast of St. Michael, he returned the key. Airbnb, baby. So another concept that is completely modern as far as we know, but that definitely dates back for millennia, the idea of a rental property, right? The idea of a rental property. So he occupied this house for 8.5 months. He began paying on the 29th day of September, 1452. And of course, the way we mark time often in the Middle Ages is feast days, the dates of which were known by all. On the feast of St. Michael, he returned the key. Right? We don't even necessarily imagine historical homes, like medieval homes, as being locked with a lock and key. But there it is. He returned the key, just like you would return the key of a rental property before they started using code pads, right? very, very recently, until recently, it was very often that you would get keys for a rental property, not just a code for the door, right? And so he actually, he owed him, there was common, for which he owes by common consent, 12 lire per year, 12 pounds per year, more or less. And he occupied it for 8.5 months. And so he paid him the prorated amount and then returned the key. Right. This is, and this is downtown. He actually gives it a neighborhood. Rent for the house in the neighborhood of Laterino, right, for which he owes 12 lire per year. And that debt was paid, right? Let me see. All the little details during different periods of policy and plots and politics is so diverse, 100%. Question, how did medieval people melt ice? It wasn't a problem in the Middle Ages, shall we say. The medieval approach to immigration and foreigners was completely different from the modern one. I'll just put it that way. Yeah, they definitely took a more properly Christian approach to foreigners, strangers in a strange land, and all of that. There was one more that I definitely, there's actually some mentions of clothing in here. Here it is. Okay. Clothing and objects of daily life. Okay, so 1454. Serafino di Meo, master woodcutter, must have 22 lire for an inlaid chest, 3.5 braccia long, and for a bedstead, 4.5 by 3.5 braccia wide, completely in agreement for these two jobs. And in place of this money, I must obtain lime for what is sold. And then on February 14th, we will measure the lime at 10 soldi per load as agreed. He must transport it to me throughout next May. And thus it says in the contract with Serafino on page 118, and if he should not deliver it by them, then I am not obliged to accept it. Right. So many interesting little details here. One, the idea of contracts. There's this bizarre, baffling, confounding, bemusing misconception that the medieval world was a lawless place without laws, without contracts. No, contracts are a big part of medieval life. And many of these contracts have survived because they're registered in the cities before a magistrate or before an official, so that everyone knows that it is an official arrangement. And many of those contracts were indentures. Does anyone know what an indenture actually is? Many of you are familiar with the term indentured servant, but maybe you never thought about what that meant. How is this person indentured? So the word indenture, comes from indented, indenture, from teeth, denture, teeth, right? That it has teeth. And that's because contracts were almost always made in duplicate. Side by side, on the same page, the clerk would actually make them in duplicate. And then they would take a pen knife, and they would cut indentures into it. They would actually do a zigzag down the center, so that to prove that it was the real contract and not a fraudulent copy that had been made in order to deceive one of the two parties, you could prove that it was the correct contract by putting it together and seeing that the indenture accurately lined up, right? That's why an indentured servant had an indenture, a contract of indenture, which would have been two parts. The servant would have had one part, the master would have had the other, right? So contracts, very much a medieval thing. And in some cases, these indentures have survived. And so you can actually see if you look up medieval indenture, you might actually get the right image results. Yeah. Mitia Makes says, thank you for making this so fun. Currently midnight in my home and I've been stuck in bed for days. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Oh, Mitia, are you ill? I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad you're enjoying from your sick bed. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. So we have a contract, and it's with a master woodcutter. So this is about how you buy things in the Middle Ages. So shopping in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, a fascinating topic. If you would like to look more into shopping in the Renaissance, there is a book called Shopping in the Renaissance. I can highly recommend it. It focuses on the 15th and 16th century, Italy specifically. So it's limited, but still fascinating. So here we have Serafino di Meo, a master woodcutter. So he has been commissioned to make an inlaid chest. So we're talking marquetry. Do any of you know what inlay is? Inlay is this stunning art that I'm not certain who invented it first. I've seen examples of it all across Eurasia through long periods of history. So I don't actually know who made the first inlaid item. There's different kinds of inlay. You can do wood inlay, you could do marble inlay, you can do mother of pearl inlay, you can do mixed media inlay. So in this era, most of the inlay that is in Italy, the examples that I've seen from the 15th century are nearly all wood. And you would use different kinds of wood to create color and depth and pattern, because different woods have different grains, they have different natural colors. And so even if you varnish it, even if you stain it, that is still preserved through the staining and the varnishing. So here we have a record of a commission. So we have a peasant. Probably most of you couldn't imagine a peasant, when you imagine peasants, having a beautiful inlaid wooden chest as part of their furnishings. But it's not just a chest. There is also a bedstead, right? The bedstead doesn't seem to be inlaid because of the way the syntax works. I think only the chest is inlaid. And also the length of this chest, it's real big. So the chest, it actually provides measurements. Oh, these details, right? The details, it's an inlaid chest, 3.5 braccia long. A braccia, literally it's an L, it's an arm, right? A braccia is pretty long. It's like a yard. So, oh wait, I actually don't know what a Sini's braccia is. Don't hold me to that. So a braccia is not a braccia, because depending on your city in Italy, it could be a different length. So a braccia can be anywhere from literally like what we would like a forearm long to a whole arm long. But I have seen chests, actual extant wooden inlaid chests from this era that are definitely 3.5 yards long. So this is anywhere, okay, so this is anywhere from like 1.5 yards long to 3.5 yards long-ish, depending on what a Sini's braccia is. Either way, it's a decently sized chest. And he also has a commission for a bedstead that is 4.5 by 3.5 braccia wide. So this is a pretty wide bedstead, either way. So the bedstead would be beds in this era in Florence, in northern Italy. They actually aren't four-poster beds. I know a lot of you might be imagining a four-poster bed. The examples that I have seen, the extant examples from the 15th century and the visual examples, it's actually a pretty complex system where you have basically like a long rectangular wooden box that's on another series of boxes that actually are chests, and then it has a headboard, a very beautiful, intricate headboard behind it. So that's the kind of bedstead. There used to be an extant 15th century bedstead in the Palazzo d'Avanzati in Florence. Unfortunately, I've only seen black and white photos of it. I don't know where it went, but it's not there anymore. But if you look up Palazzo d'Avanzati bed, 15th century bed, you can probably see pictures of it. But if you look up basically any 15th century Florentine scene, birth of the Virgin, birth of the Baptist, you can see an example of the kind of bedstead that would have been commissioned here. It's an expensive piece of furniture. So we have a peasant who has he's commissioned this beautiful inlaid chest and this beautiful bedstead. And what's interesting is, he has to pay 22 lire to Serafino di Meo, right, to this master woodcutter, completely in agreement for those two jobs. But in place of this money, I must obtain lime for what is sold, and then we'll measure the lime, and at 10 soldi, so it's like futures. He's talking about lime futures. Lime, we're not talking about fruit limes. by the way. We're not talking about fruit limes. Lime is a key substance in the medieval world. It is a key construction substance. It is used in so many aspects of daily life, and it doesn't say here whether it's quicklime or lime, but either way, you can slake lime to turn it into quicklime. And lime was used in plaster, it's used in painting, it's used sometimes in dyeing, it's used in making pigments, it's used to dissolve things, it's used in tanning. You know, lime is used in so many key industries in medieval Europe. It is a key material, and you create lime. One of the ways that you can create lime, there's limestone. You can slake limestone and get the lime from it. If you live near a coast, you can slake seashells. They're very lime rich, and get the lime from it. So there's different ways that you can get lime, but lime was so crucial to the medieval world. Someone could probably write a dissertation about how the medieval world turned on lime. Honestly. Yeah. Pamela, Lilo, welcome. Thank you for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone. Yeah, so we're talking about using lime in lieu of the 22 lire, right? And so they've agreed on how much the lime will be worth, that per load, and load is probably an official measurement here, would be 10 soldi. And so he must obtain lime that will be the equivalent of 22 lire worth of lime, and then he will use that. He will pay Serafino with that. So you can see the way in which, even though it's all based on cash values, there is still kind of this barter aspect to 15th century life, right? Especially at the level of this peasant. It's possible that he, on his lands, he may have actually had limestone. Limestone may have been one of the kinds of stone of rock that naturally occurred on the lands that he had rented to farm, or that he maybe owned to farm. I have to read more about him to find out whether he rented or owned these lands. But if he had limestone, then he would be able to slake his own limestone and get lime from it. That's what he can mean by obtain here. Not that he goes and buys it, that he actually manufactures it himself. Because peasants had cycles, right? If you were a peasant, there were times of the year that were busier than other times. There were times when it was go, 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 all hands on deck. And then there were times when it was just kind of daily maintenance. And during those times of more relaxed maintenance, a peasant would engage in other kinds of production and other kinds of work that would still earn them money while they're waiting for their crops to grow, while they're waiting for the animals to reach a slaughterable size, et cetera, et cetera. So lime slaking would have actually been a way that a medieval peasant would have earned a supplemental income. And here there's evidence of him using it as a form of currency. How fun is that? Right? All of these little things. Okay, ramen noodling. We are reading from the memoirs of a peasant, Bernadetto, a peasant named Bernadetto from Siena, from the 15th century. This is him recording what he viewed as major transactions in his life. It's not necessarily the same kind of memoirs where we would write our feelings and write an account story time. It's not that kind of memoir. It's a memoir that gives us details about daily life, about the kinds of things he bought and sold, about the way he earned money, about the things on which he had to spend money, about the running of his estate. Yeah. So Takeda says, what is amazing is how many middens have great amounts of shellfish shells, yet lime was such a commodity. I'm guessing the fuel needed to convert it was too costly. Yeah, it is really weird why there are so many mins. You're absolutely right, Takeda. Why are there so many mins with shellfish shells? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, maybe the fuel that would have been required to convert it was too costly, or they had a better, more readily, more easily accessible source of lime. Maybe the limestone that they had locally was easier to get the lime from that limestone than from the shells. That is a good point. Why are there shells at all? There's so many good uses for shells. Pomelo Lilo says, I've heard of many places in Asia using shells as currency too. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Shells were historically have across various parts of Asia been used as currency. And also here in Korea, as part of the the historical indigo dyeing, starting back in the first millennium AD, in Korea, they slaked because they eat shellfish here like crazy. Shellfish is a big, eaten very, very commonly, has been eaten very, very commonly here for millennia probably. So they had a lot of shells, and they definitely slaked them to turn them into lime that they definitely used in indigo dyeing. So yeah. Yeah, Takeda, that's a good point. If someone can tell me why medieval people would have put shells in middens are trash piles, basically underground trash piles, but still, why medieval people would have tossed their shells away instead of selling them to the lime maker. There's a better word for that profession offhand, but I can't remember it. To the lime maker, to the slaker. I don't know. That makes no sense. Why would they have thrown them away instead of slaking them for lime? Yep, that is kind of crazy. Okay, so he's got this bed, he's got this inlaid chest. You imagine this peasant, you don't imagine him having a chest, you don't imagine him having a beautiful bedstead, you don't imagine him having, a source of supplemental income like lime slaking to sell the lime. Yeah. Leah says, "Where do you live in Korea?" That's so neat. I technically don't live here. I am a vacationer here. Technically, we are trying to find a way to officially live here, but right now I'm just on long-term vacation. Yeah. In fact, I have to leave basically in fewer than 2 weeks, a week almost at this point. Holy shit! I'm leaving in a week to go to Thailand. I need to keep that in mind. I'm leaving in a week to go to Thailand because I'm almost at the end of my 90 days. But Daegu. And why do we live here? Because the US military originally sent us here and we fell in love with it. Life here is great. Life here in Korea is beautiful. If you're interested in my life here in Korea, check out Travels with the Creative Contessa. I have a whole playlist dedicated to Korea and to Daegu in particular. Yep. Travels with the Creative Contessa is one of my several other channels. Okay, moving on. Yeah, see, it's entries like that, and I realized I'd marked a bunch of things, but my cats knocked the books down, and all the little markers came out. Let me see here. So, what else do we have here of particular interest? Oh, yes, this one. Okay. On the 26th of October, 1471. And this is interesting because this is about this is a record in the town. These aren't Benedetto's memoirs. This is a record from the town that records his interactions with them. So this is a view from the other direction, right? On the 26th of October, 1475, I, Francesco Belliarmati, official of the town, have received today, the day mentioned above, 9 lire, 8 soldi, owed by Benedetto del Mazzarizia as tax on his kiln, and they are recorded in the income on page 127. Right. The same on the 14th of November, 4 lire, 14 soldi, recorded on page 10. So first off, these are the town's records. And again, a lot of people have this weird misconception of the medieval world as pure chaos, illiterate, no one writes, there's no records, there's no law, there's no order. Couldn't be farther from the truth. There is a brief period in the first millennium around the time of and just after the Justinian plague, where things do get dark, where the records are stopped, where we don't see very much in the way of record keeping because everyone's too busy dying of the plague. But pretty much by the 7th century, by the 8th century, records are being kept again in massive quantities all across Europe. Now, whether they have survived to the modern day is a different question, but they were kept. And this one survives from 1475, and it says that Benedetto has to pay a tax on his kiln, and this might be a lime kiln. Actually, this doesn't say what kind of kiln. It might be a lime kiln, right? So lime kilns were a kiln that was specifically for slaking lime, and that we have that reference earlier to him using lime as a form of currency to pay for his furniture. And now we have a record of him paying the town, paying a tax on his kiln that actually connects it, right? So yeah, and a lot of people don't think about a lot of people also think about taxation as being a modern concept, but the medieval world, depending on where you were, had very sophisticated taxation systems, and they taxed a variety of things. So they actually are taxing him for having a kiln and using a kiln. Same thing, ovens were often taxed because it was a source of income. And it was probably, in many cases, it was easier to tax the source of the income than to necessarily tax your income itself. Especially in a world where you've got all this bartering happening, it's harder to trace that and tax that as a source of income than it is to tax the source of the income itself. I think that's the logic behind it anyway. That's what I've always assumed. If you know differently why you would tax a kiln or an oven or a mill, the mill itself, rather than the income from the mill, let me know. So yeah, so we've got this kiln and he had to pay it to the town. And then you're probably going to ask yourself, well, what are these taxes being used for in the 15th century? Towns have infrastructure in the 15th century. It might not be our idea of an infrastructure necessarily, but you had to upkeep the walls of the city for defensive purposes. Certain areas were absolutely still paved, and some towns put up public monuments and built public infrastructure, buildings that were publicly accessible, like marketplaces. So there was infrastructure that even then needed to be funded, right? Is that a medieval replica teacup? This one, it is not. It is not a Korean. This is, at least I don't think it is. I haven't seen any medieval Korean teacups that actually look like this. It's a modern, it's a teacup. It's a Korean teacup made by an actual potter here, but I wouldn't say it's a replica of a medieval one. I don't have any replica medieval pottery here. Korean pottery. Out in the other room, if my condottiere were here and not off playing Dungeons and Dragons, then I could send him for some of our replica medieval pottery, but I don't have any right here. Ramen Noodling says, this is fascinating. Would this guy have been considered well off for a peasant or pretty standard? So Ramen Noodling, the more I read, the more I think that Benedetto is more representative of the average peasant rather than an exception. So the more I read about the sorts of things that peasants owned, the more I see peasants depicted in art, the more I read stories about them, their inclusion in folktales from the era that talk about the sorts of things they owned in their property, I increasingly believe that this is probably more common than less, which is why the myth of the poor medieval peasant really is just that. It really seems increasingly to be a myth. So this does seem to be pretty standard, especially when you start reading the wills that peasants left behind. Bologna has a large archive of wills from middle-class people, what we would call middle-class people from the 14th and the 15th century. Lots of people, many of whom are peasants, and they have a lot of belongings that are being bequeathed to other people. Other questions? Will I be visiting Chiang Mai? We will be going to Chiang Mai also, and I hope to get back to Ayutthaya, both of which Chiang Mai was the medieval capital of the Lana Kingdom, and Ayutthaya was the medieval capital of Siam, what is now Thailand. So yeah, we're hoping to get to both of those places. Let me see. Oh, Pamela Lilo. Are you currently in Thailand, or are you a Thai expat the way I'm an American expat? Yeah, Thai stuff is really interesting. Okay. Any questions? Any questions? We are coming up rapidly on the 3-hour mark, and I'm starting to get super thirsty and hungry. So I am going to just show you. So we didn't get to all of our readings. Are there any final questions about our peasant, about Benedetto? Oh, there's a whole chapter on his lime kiln here. It is a lime kiln. I was right. It's a lime kiln. I really need to read the rest. I got so interested in the actual the accounts themselves that I will admit I have not fully read through the biography part. For those who know, I will be, of the 2 books from which we read today, I will do a community post with a picture of the front and the ISBN, so that if you want to obtain these books for yourselves, you absolutely may. Or if you want to get them through interlibrary loan, another great way to get books without having to add to the amount of stuff in your home and or lay out money. Yeah, they meant Chiang Mai. Oh, She said Chiang Mai, didn't she? Yeah, no, I know she meant Chiang Mai. I know. Probably autocorrect changed it to Chiang Mai. So the first book from which we read are The Lay of Marie de France, and the second one is The Renaissance in the Fields. And as I said in my community post, I will post pictures of the front and the back for the ISBN. But yeah, I'll definitely be in Chiang Mai. I will be in Chiang Mai and Ayutthaya. So the books we didn't cover today, but we will cover in our next reading session are, there was a third book. Oh yeah, we will definitely cover in our next reading session are Honor, Vengeance, and Social Trouble. Pardon letters in the Burgundian Low Countries. So this is going to be a little more violent because there's going to be people killing each other and hitting each other and attacking each other, because that's why you get pardoned. And then we will be reading from two memoirs of Renaissance Florence, the diaries of Bonocorso Pitti and Gregorio Datti. Right, so we'll be getting to those in our next medieval story time, which will probably be sometime this week. I have to look at my schedule. Okay, comment. I've read that the US fiercely resisted the Brits in the 18th century because of British taxation or because of tax. Ah, right. So, yes. So the colonists, I'm American, this is my history, so I can talk about it. The colonists in the 18th century didn't necessarily object to the taxation itself. They sort of did, but what they really objected to was that they didn't get a representative in Parliament. So it was taxation. Everyone else in England in Scotland and Wales had representatives, and Ireland had representatives in Parliament. And some of them were elected, actually. They were represented in Parliament, but the colonies were not. They had no one representing them in Parliament. And then there was an issue with this, the government. There was a stamp tax and there was a window tax. And so there was definitely some resentment that it felt like the colonists were paying all these taxes, paying some taxes back to the homeland, and they weren't seeing any, they didn't feel like they were getting the value for their money. However, I'm of the opinion that a bunch of rich bastards didn't want to pay taxes and didn't want the source of their income, their goods, being taxed. The colonists didn't want. And so they kind of convinced everyone that it would be a good idea to, fight about taxes. I'm kind of cynical these days on oligarchs. I don't trust them. So I don't necessarily trust our founding fathers so much either, although they did have some really good ideas. But yeah. Okay, so I would like to thank my channel members, my YouTube channel members, and my patrons on Patreon for supporting my work. I'd like to thank all of you who leave super chats. If you're interested in getting more benefits and access to more interesting content and footage and resources, I share lots of extra things with my patrons and my channel members, extra tutorials, extra readings, extra footage. I have a private Creative Contessa Discord server, and we actually chat. We actually have talks, video and voice calls where we talk about things and share information and knowledge. I share all kinds of extra digital resources there as well. So if you're interested in access to more than is public facing, and you would also like to support my work, consider becoming a patron or on Patreon or a channel member on YouTube. Stephanie, there you are. Hello. Comment. The peasants were probably living lives of quiet desperation. The basic strategy of medieval war was avoiding battle and ruining crops and villages to bankrupt the enemy country. Yeah. So, depending on where you lived as a peasant and where your farm was, it could be pretty rough, which says nothing about your income. Which says nothing about your income and the income level that you could enjoy or to which you had access. They weren't poor necessarily, but yeah, absolutely. There was certainly a component of quiet desperation, especially in France during the 100 Years' War. Yeah, it was a common battle tactic, a common way to win a battle, or to win the war, was to control the resources or eliminate the resources. And by burning a farm down, you didn't just burn down that year's crops. It would take years to recover in some cases. So yeah, absolutely. Which is why in many parts of Europe, fortified farms become a thing. Anyone go to Germany? If you travel around Germany and you go through the countryside, you're going to see walls around farms. And those are the fortified farm manors that they're not castles. They weren't owned by nobility, but a lot of peasants started fortifying their farms for that reason. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, Live Loco. Welcome. Sorry that you're reaching the end of the chat. I will be going live again tomorrow, roughly at about the same time, 11 a.m. Asia time, which will be 9 p.m. Saturday East Coast. Right. For those of you who don't know, I'm in the future. I'm GMZ +9. I'm in Seoul Standard Time. So for many of you, I am your future. The future still looks bleak, by the way. So yeah, I'll be going live again tomorrow. It'll be a medieval sewing party tomorrow. So I will be working on some kind of project and holding forth about a variety of medieval topics and answering all of your questions. And I will definitely delve more into the concept of poverty or not poverty in the Middle Ages in response to that question. If you have any questions and I didn't answer them, I'm not ignoring you if it's a fair question and not just an asshole question. I'm not ignoring you. It just means I missed it. If you pop it in the comments under the video, when it posts, I will see the comment and I promise I will answer it. If you're watching this as a recording, same thing applies. Pop any questions into the comments and I will respond to them. Otherwise, I really hope to see you all tomorrow or at my next live stream. I do live stream on a regular basis, so don't forget to hit that bell because I can also live stream at random times. Okay, everyone. I hope to see you all tomorrow. Until next time, everyone, may your journeys of learning be creative.